Right now, somewhere, a phone is glowing in the dark, and a very confident voice is telling a sleepy person exactly what to do. Do not touch your coffee. Not yet. Wait 90 minutes after you open your eyes. Not 60. Not 75. 90, or if you want to be safe, closer to 120. And the reason sounds airtight. Your cortisol, that stress hormone, is still climbing toward its morning peak. If you pour caffeine on top of a hormone that is already lifting you up, you waste the caffeine, you build tolerance faster, and worst of all, you set yourself up for that miserable crash in the afternoon. That heavy, foggy 2 o'clock feeling where your head wants to lie down on the desk. All of it, supposedly, because you drank your coffee too early. Now I want you to notice something before we go one step further. That claim does not sound like a superstition. It does not sound like your grandmother telling you to feed a cold and starve a fever. It sounds like science. It uses words you would find printed in a physiology textbook. Cortisol, adenosine, receptor blockade. It comes with a number, and the number is oddly precise. 90 minutes. When somebody hands you a precise number, your brain relaxes. A precise number feels earned. It feels measured. It feels like somebody stood in a laboratory with a stopwatch and a blood sample and found out that 90 was the magic figure and 85 was not quite enough. So here is what I want to do tonight, and we have all the time in the world, so let us not rush any of it. I want to take this rule as seriously as it deserves to be taken. I do not want to sneer at it. That is the cheap thing to do, and it teaches you nothing. Sneering never taught anybody a single fact about nature. Instead, I want to build the case for the 90-minute rule so carefully, so honestly, that by the time we are an hour into this, you will be nodding along and thinking, well, of course, it has to be true. Look how the pieces fit. And then, only then, once we have built the thing up on its strongest foundation, we are going to walk around behind it and see what is actually holding it up. And I will warn you now, gently, because you may be drifting off already, that what is holding it up is not quite what you would expect. Let us start with a piece that is absolutely, unarguably real. Because a good false idea is almost never built out of pure nonsense. If it were pure nonsense, nobody would fall for it. A really durable false idea is built mostly out of true things, arranged in a way that only looks like it must lead to the conclusion. So let us begin with the true things and give them their full weight. The first true thing is cortisol, and something called the cortisol awakening response. This is real. This has a name. It has been measured. It happens in your body every single morning, whether you believe in it or not. Here is what happens. In the first 30 to 45 minutes after you wake up, the amount of cortisol in your blood does not stay flat. It surges. On average, it climbs by about 50%. In some people, it climbs by as little as 38%. In others, by as much as 75%, and it happens in roughly 77 out of every 100 healthy people. So this is not a rare quirk. This is most of us, most mornings. If you could measure the cortisol in your saliva at the moment your eyes open, you might find something like 15 units of it in the little unit the scientists use, and then 30 minutes later, without your having done anything at all, no coffee, no breakfast, no argument with anybody, that number has climbed to around 23. It just goes up. Your body lifts it up for you, like an invisible hand turning up the lights before you are quite ready for the day. Why would the body do such a thing? Well, think about what waking up actually is. For hours you have been lying there, unconscious, your muscles slack, your blood pressure low, your whole system idling like a car parked overnight in a cold garage. And now, in the space of a few minutes, you are supposed to stand up, walk, think, deal with the world. That is a big transition. Cortisol is part of how your body throws the switch. It nudges your blood sugar up, it sharpens you, it gets the machine ready to run. So this morning surge of cortisol is not a malfunction. It is a feature. It is your body's way of pouring itself a cup of something before you have poured yourself a cup of anything. And you can already feel where this is going, can't you? If cortisol is nature's own morning stimulant, and it is peaking in that first half hour or so after you wake, then adding caffeine right at that moment seems, on its face, a little foolish. It seems like turning on a second faucet when the first one is already running full blast. Why waste the caffeine when your body is already doing the job for free? Wait, the reasoning goes, until the natural surge is past. Let cortisol do its work, let it start to come back down, and then, when the tank is running low, that is when you top it up with caffeine. That is the whole emotional core of the 90-minute rule, and I want you to feel how sensible it is. Because it is sensible. It is a perfectly reasonable thing to guess. But cortisol is only the first pillar. The rule stands on a second one, and the second pillar is even more persuasive, because it connects directly to that afternoon crash we all dread. That second pillar is a molecule called adenosine, and the whole beautiful story of sleep pressure. We are going to spend a long, comfortable while on adenosine, because it is genuinely one of the loveliest little pieces of machinery in all of biology, and because understanding it properly is the key to everything that comes later, including the moment where this whole rule quietly falls apart. Here is adenosine in one picture. Every waking hour, inside your brain you are burning fuel. Your neurons are firing, doing their work, and like any machine that runs on fuel, they produce a kind of exhaust. One of the byproducts of all that brain activity is this molecule, adenosine, and it slowly builds up in certain regions of the brain across the whole day. The longer you have been awake, the more of it accumulates. And adenosine, when it lands on the right spots in your brain, makes you feel sleepy. It is, in a real sense, the substance that keeps track of how long you have been awake. Think of it like sand trickling into the bottom of an hourglass. When you wake in the morning, freshly slept, the top of the hourglass is full and the bottom is nearly empty. As the day goes on, grain by grain, hour by hour, the sand piles up at the bottom. By late evening the pile is deep, and you feel it as that heavy pull toward bed. Then you sleep, and during sleep your brain clears the adenosine away, sweeps the sand back up to the top of the glass, and you wake refreshed, ready to start the slow accumulation all over again. This idea that sleepiness is a pressure that builds while you are awake and drains while you sleep was written down in a careful, formal way back in 1982 by a scientist named Alexander Borbély. He called it the two-process model, and it is one of those ideas that once you understand it, you see it working in yourself every single day. There are two processes, and he gave them plain letters. There is process S, where the S stands for sleep, or you could think of it as the sleep pressure, the homeostatic drive. That is the hourglass, the rising pile of adenosine, the debt that grows the longer you stay awake. And there is process C, where the C stands for circadian, which just means about a day, a rhythm that runs on a roughly 24-hour cycle. Process C is a clock. It is your internal timekeeper, ticking along whether you are awake or asleep, telling your body what time it thinks it is, pushing you toward alertness at some hours and toward drowsiness at others, all on its own schedule that does not much care how long you happen to have been awake. And here is the thing to hold on to, because we will come back to it much later when we rebuild the real story. The feeling you have at any given moment, wide awake or dragging, is not one process or the other. It is the two of them working together, sometimes pulling in the same direction, sometimes pulling against each other. The rising sand of process S is always pushing you a little more towards sleep as the day wears on. The clock of process C is layered on top, lifting you and lowering you on its own rhythm. Put the two together and you get the shape of a normal day. Bright and clear in the mid-morning, a dip in the early afternoon, a curious second wind in the evening, and then, as the sand piles deep and the clock swings toward night, the long slide into sleep. That afternoon dip, that 2 o'clock wall, is sitting right there in the model waiting for us. Keep it in the back of your mind. We are going to walk straight back to it, and when we do, you are going to see it in a completely different light than the 90-minute rule would have you believe. But before we walk back to that afternoon wall, we have one more piece to lay down, and it is the piece that makes the whole 90-minute story feel airtight. Because so far I have given you two players. The sand of process S, which is really the slow gathering of a little molecule called adenosine in the wake-promoting parts of your brain, and the clock of process C ticking along on its roughly 24-hour rhythm. Now I want to bring in the third character in this play, the one you actually poured into a cup this morning. Caffeine. Here is what caffeine does, and I want you to see it as clearly as if you were watching two shapes fit together on a table. Adenosine, that little sleepiness molecule, works by settling into certain landing pads on the surface of your nerve cells. We call those landing pads receptors. When adenosine lands, it quiets the cell down. It is a calming, slowing, settling signal. Enough of it landing in enough places, and you feel the weight of the day pressing your eyelids toward the floor. That is the sand talking. That is process S, made real, molecule by molecule, receptor by receptor. Now caffeine has a shape, and it just so happens that its shape is close enough to adenosine's that it can climb into those same landing pads. But here is the mischief of it. Caffeine climbs in, and then it does nothing. It sits there. It occupies the seat, but it does not send the calming signal. It is like a fellow who takes the chair at the counter and orders nothing and refuses to leave, so the person who actually wanted to sit and be served, the adenosine, has nowhere to land. The sleepiness signal cannot be delivered, because the mailbox is stuffed with something that looks like mail but is not. We have a fancy phrase for this. We call caffeine a competitive antagonist. Competitive because it is competing with adenosine for the same seats. Antagonist because once it wins the seat, it blocks the show. And it does this at not one kind of landing pad, but all four kinds your body makes. We label them with little names: the A1, the A2A, the A2B, and the A3. Caffeine will sit in all of them, but the one that matters most for the feeling of being awake is the second one on that list, the A2A. Block that particular kind of receptor, and you get the alertness, the lift, the sense that the fog has burned off. That is where your wakefulness is coming from, not from energy poured into you. Caffeine has almost no calories worth speaking of. It gives you nothing. It simply stops you from feeling the tiredness you had already earned. That is a strange and important thing to sit with. Your coffee is not a fuel. It is a blindfold placed over the part of you that keeps track of how long you have been awake. And it gets into you with remarkable ease. When you drink it, very nearly all of it, essentially the whole dose, crosses out of your gut and into your blood. We say its oral bioavailability is close to 100%. There is no waste, no large fraction thrown away. What you swallow, you get. Within a fairly short while, it is riding your bloodstream up into the brain, climbing into those seats, and quietly evicting the sleepiness you were about to feel. So now, look at what we have built. Look at how tidy it is. You wake up. Your body, on its own schedule, floods you with the stress hormone cortisol in that first half hour, lifting you from the depths of sleep into the business of the morning. Meanwhile, the adenosine you piled up yesterday has been swept away during the night, so the seats are empty, the sand is low, and you feel, or ought to feel, clear. And here comes the argument, the clever-sounding argument. If your cortisol is already doing the job of waking you, why waste your coffee? Why send caffeine climbing into receptors that are mostly empty anyway? Wait, the argument says. Wait until the cortisol tide has crested and begun to fall. Wait until the adenosine has had a chance to start creeping back. Then, into that dip, drop your caffeine, and it will have real work to do, and you will not have wasted a drop, and you will not have stacked caffeine on top of a cortisol peak like two hands shoving you at once. Wait about 90 minutes, maybe 120. Let the hormone do its part first. I have to tell you, when you lay it out that way, it sounds like physics. It has the smell of a real mechanism. It has hormones and receptors and molecules with proper names. It has timing. It has a number. And people love a number, because a number feels like knowledge. If somebody tells you to eat well and sleep enough, you nod and forget it. But if somebody tells you 90 minutes, precisely 90, well now, that sounds like someone measured something. That sounds like a law of nature you can set a kitchen timer by. So let me ask the question that a curious person always has to ask, no matter how good a story sounds. Where did the number come from? Not, is the story pretty? It is very pretty, The question is, who measured the 90 minutes? In what room? With what instruments? On how many people did somebody establish that this particular delay does this particular thing? Because a mechanism that sounds airtight and a mechanism that is actually true are not the same animal, and the only way to tell them apart is to go and look at where the claim was born. And when you go and look, you find something that I think is one of the most honest and quietly deflating little facts in this whole business. The 90-minute rule does not come from a clinical trial. It does not come from a laboratory full of subjects wired to monitors, sipping coffee at carefully staggered times while somebody measures their crash. It comes from a blog post, a single essay written in the year 2013 by a young man named Stephen Miller, who was at the time a graduate student, a doctoral student in neuroscience at a place called the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. A smart fellow, a student of the very systems we have been describing. And he did something perfectly reasonable and perfectly human. He looked at what was known about the cortisol rhythm, and he reasoned his way to a suggestion. His reasoning went like this. For a person on a fairly ordinary schedule, cortisol tends to reach its high point somewhere around 8 or 9 in the morning. So, he proposed, perhaps the smart window to drink your coffee is later, roughly between 9:30 and 11:30, once that cortisol has crested and started to come down. It is a thoughtful idea. It connects real things. And notice, he offered it as a suggestion, a piece of reasoning, an interesting thought about timing. He was not committing a crime. He was thinking out loud the way any of us might over a cup of coffee about coffee. But watch what happens to an idea like that once it leaves the hand that made it. It does not stay a modest suggestion. It travels. It gets repeated, and in the repeating it, hardens. The gentle maybe drops away. The reasoning behind it drops away. What survives is the number, because the number is portable and the number is memorable. 90 minutes. And after enough tellings, the thing that started life as a graduate student's plausible guess is being passed to you as though it were carved on a tablet, as though somewhere there were a study, a real solid study that had pinned it down. There is a wonderful and slightly dangerous machinery in the way people pass ideas along. The caveats are heavy and the conclusions are light, and so in the tumbling from one mouth to the next, the caveats fall out and only the light, quotable conclusion goes flying on ahead. Now I want to be very careful and very fair here, because it would be the easiest thing in the world and the cheapest to make fun of a young scientist for writing down an idea. That is not what I am doing, and that is not the lesson. Reasoning from a mechanism to a guess is exactly how science begins. You look at what you know, you notice a pattern, you say, if these things are true, then perhaps this follows. That is honorable work. That is the first step of every discovery ever made. The trouble is never in making the guess. The trouble is in forgetting that it was a guess. The trouble is when nobody circles back to do the harder, slower, less glamorous thing, which is to actually test it, to take real people and real coffee and real clocks and measure whether the crash you were promised relief from actually comes any softer when you wait. So that is the fault line running under our beautiful, tidy story. Everything we built, the cortisol tide, the adenosine sand, the caffeine climbing into its seats, all of that is real physiology, and I stand by every piece of it. But the bridge from that real physiology to the specific instruction, wait 90 minutes and you will save yourself an afternoon crash, that bridge was never built by measurement. It was sketched by reasoning and then repeated until it looked solid. And in science, a bridge that looks solid and a bridge that has been walked across and load tested are two very different things to trust your weight to. Which brings us at last to the people who went and load tested it. And who were they, these people? Well, in the year 2024, a group of researchers, Antonio and his colleagues, published a review in a journal that sounds about as far from cozy morning rituals as you can get. It is called the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. Now, a review is a particular kind of scientific paper. It is not one experiment. It is somebody sitting down with the whole pile of what has been measured, all the studies, all the numbers, and asking honestly now, when you put it all together, what does it actually say? And in that review there is a sentence. I want to give it to you almost exactly the way they wrote it, because it is so blunt, and scientists are almost never this blunt, that it is worth hearing in their own words. They said that a fundamental basis for suggesting that delaying caffeine intake in the early waking hours would prevent an afternoon crash is completely lacking. Completely lacking. Sit with those two words for a moment, because they are doing a lot of quiet work. They did not say the idea is probably wrong. They did not say more research is needed, which is the polite phrase scientists use when they want to be invited back. They said the foundation, the basis, the thing that was supposed to be holding the whole instruction up, is not weak. It is not thin. It is not there. You go looking under the bridge for the pilings, the great concrete legs sunk into the riverbed that are supposed to bear the load, and you find the water going by underneath, undisturbed, and nothing else. The bridge was floating on its own confidence the whole time. Now I want to be careful, because it would be easy to hear that and think, so it is all nonsense, cortisol is a fairy tale, throw the whole thing out. No, that is not what they found, and that is not what I am telling you. The cortisol is real. The tide comes in every morning just as I described it to you. The adenosine is real. The sand piles up. The caffeine slips into its seats and blocks the signal. All of that machinery is exactly as advertised. What collapsed is not the machinery. What collapsed is one specific claim about what happens when you nudge one specific lever, the timing of your first sip, and expect a specific reward, a gentler afternoon. That link, and only that link, is the thing standing on nothing. So let us go and watch it fall, piece by piece, because the falling is more instructive than the sentence that condemns it. Start with the cortisol, since that was the heart of the original argument. The whole beautiful idea was that your morning cortisol wave is already flooding you with wakefulness, so pouring caffeine on top is wasteful, like salting a dish that is already salted, and worse, you are somehow burning through your body's own supply of alertness before you need it. Wait for the tide to go out, the story said, and then add your caffeine to the empty beach where it will do the most good. It is a lovely picture. And here is the first crack. When the researchers actually looked at when the cortisol wave peaks, they found it crests within about 1 hour of waking, and it does this whether or not you drink coffee. Your coffee does not summon the wave. Your coffee does not schedule the wave. The wave was set in motion by your waking brain long before your hand ever reached for the mug, and it is going to rise and crest on its own timetable, on the order of a single hour, no matter what you do with your kitchen. So already the premise is wobbling. The rule tells you to wait for cortisol to come down and hints that this takes an hour and a half or so when the wave itself has largely done its business inside the first hour. But that is the gentle crack. Here is the one that really splits the beam. It turns out that caffeine does not merely coexist with your cortisol. Caffeine raises your cortisol. When you drink it, your cortisol climbs by something like 30 to 33% above where it was sitting, and it stays elevated for somewhere between 1 and 2 hours after you swallow it. And now here is the part that takes the whole clever plan and turns it inside out. It does this regardless of the time you drink it. It does not matter if you have your coffee the moment your feet hit the floor, or if you dutifully wait your 90 minutes, or if you hold out until the middle of the morning. The caffeine bumps your cortisol up by roughly a third either way. Do you see what that does to the argument? The entire point of waiting was to avoid a cortisol collision, to keep from stacking caffeine on top of a hormone that is already high. But the caffeine is not a bystander that politely fits into the gap you have opened for it. The caffeine is itself a cortisol raiser. So no matter when you drink it, you are creating a cortisol bump. You cannot dodge the collision by changing the time, because you are carrying the collision in the cup. The thing you are trying to schedule around is riding along inside the very thing you are scheduling. It is a little like being told to wait until the rain stops before you turn on the sprinklers, when the sprinklers are what is making it rain. The waiting buys you nothing, because the wetness is coming from your own hand. That is the cortisol pillar, gone. Kicked out from under the bridge. And a careful person at this point would say, all right, but the cortisol was only half the story. Remember, there were two mechanisms holding the rule up. There was the cortisol tide, yes, but there was also the adenosine, and the adenosine argument had a different flavor to it. That one said, in the first 90 minutes after you wake, your brain is still busy clearing out the adenosine that piled up overnight, still sweeping the sand off the beach. And if you drink your coffee before that sweeping is finished, the caffeine gets in the way, it clutters the beach while the cleanup crew is trying to work. Wait until the sand is cleared, said the rule, and then the caffeine has a clean floor to work on. That has a certain plausibility too, doesn't it? It feels like it ought to be true. And this is where I have to show you something quiet and devastating about the actual numbers, because the whole adenosine argument lives or dies on a question of timing, and the timing is simply wrong. When your brain responds to waking, when it registers that you are now awake and it needs to shift its adenosine signaling to match, that adjustment does not take 90 minutes. It does not take an hour. The researchers describe it as happening on the order of minutes, not hours. Minutes. By the time you have found your slippers and filled the kettle and stood there in the gray light waiting for the water to boil, the adenosine business your brain does upon waking is already, for the most part, done. The sand you are waiting to see swept away has, in the relevant sense, already been swept in a matter of minutes, not in the leisurely hour and a half the rule needs in order to have any meaning at all. So the adenosine pillar depends on there being a long, slow 90-minute window during which something important is still happening that the caffeine would interrupt. And when you go and measure that window, it is not 90 minutes long. It is a few minutes long. The window the whole rule was built to protect closes almost as soon as you open your eyes. You are being told to tiptoe past a room where the delicate work is being done, to wait in the hall until it is finished, and you get to the door and find the work was finished before you even arrived, and the room is empty, and it has been empty the whole time you were standing there holding your cold mug, being patient. That is the second pillar. Also gone. And now, if you are the sort of person who likes to keep score, you will notice something almost comic has happened. We had two mechanisms, cortisol and adenosine, and each one was supposed to be a good reason to wait. And when we go to inspect them, the cortisol reason evaporates because caffeine bumps cortisol no matter when you drink it, and the adenosine reason evaporates because the adenosine adjustment is over in minutes. Both of the legs the rule was standing on turn out to be standing on nothing themselves. It is legs all the way down, and at the bottom, no floor. But I have saved a wrinkle for you, and it is my favorite one, because it is the kind of thing that only shows up when you stop reasoning from the armchair and start paying attention to who these rules are actually being given to. Think about who is most likely to hear the 90-minute rule and take it seriously. It is not the person who drinks coffee twice a year. It is the devoted, daily, 2-cup, 3-cup, 4-cup coffee drinker, the person for whom the morning cup is a sacrament, the person most anxious to optimize it. And here is the thing about that person's body. It has seen caffeine before. It saw caffeine yesterday, and the day before, and every day for years. And a body that sees caffeine every single day does something rather clever. It adapts. Let me tell you what it adapts really means, because it is a lovely piece of bookkeeping the body does without ever asking your permission. When you block a receptor day after day, the cell notices that its adenosine is knocking and nobody is answering the door. So it does the sensible thing. It builds more doors. It manufactures additional adenosine receptors and studs them along the surface of the cell so that even with caffeine sitting in a good number of the old locks, there are fresh unlocked ones for adenosine to settle into. The daily drinker is not getting the same jolt the occasional drinker gets. Not even close. The occasional drinker walks into a quiet house and the caffeine has the run of the place. The daily drinker walks into a house that has quietly added 3 new wings while nobody was looking. Now carry that same idea over to the cortisol part of the story, the part the 90-minute rule leans on hardest. Remember the claim underneath it all. Coffee, they say, gives your cortisol a shove, and cortisol is already high in the morning, so you should not stack a shove on top of a peak. But the review I keep returning to looked carefully at what regular caffeine does to that cortisol shove, and the finding is almost funny once you sit with it. In someone taking in around 200 milligrams of caffeine a day, roughly 2 decent cups, the cortisol response to caffeine is already blunted, dulled, turned down. And in someone taking in 300 to 600 milligrams a day, which is a great many of the people fussing over their morning timing, that cortisol response, and I am quoting the sense of it plainly, may be abolished completely. Abolished. Gone. Not reduced, not softened, simply not there in any measurable way. So follow where that leaves us. The 90-minute rule says do not let caffeine spike your cortisol during the morning window. But the very people most devoted to the rule are precisely the people in whom caffeine no longer spikes cortisol at all. The mechanism the rule is built to protect you from has already quietly closed up shop in your particular body, because you drink coffee every day, which is the only reason you ever cared about the rule in the first place. It is a burglar alarm sold to a house with no doors. It is a raincoat for a fish. The rule survives only in the imagination of the person who does not actually need it, and it dissolves in the bloodstream of the person who does. I find that genuinely delightful, in the way that only a truly self-defeating idea can be delightful. And so both legs are gone, and the wrinkle underneath the legs is gone too, and we are standing in an empty lot where a very tidy building used to be. This is the uncomfortable moment in any honest investigation. You have cleared the ground, and now something has to go up in place of what you knocked down, or you have simply been a vandal. So let us build. Let us build slowly, and let us build with the real materials this time, the ones that were there all along while everyone was busy admiring the pretty number. Start with a single fact that does more work than any rule about waking. When caffeine enters you, nearly all of it gets in. Its oral availability is close to 100%, which means the coffee does not hold anything back at the border. What you swallow, you absorb. That is unusual and worth pausing on. Many things you eat and drink are half-wasted, broken down before they ever reach the blood in a useful form. Caffeine is not shy that way. It arrives, essentially in full, and it goes looking for those adenosine locks. So the interesting question was never really when it gets in. It gets in. The interesting question is how long it stays. And that is where the whole story finally becomes personal, becomes yours, stops being a rule and becomes a fingerprint. The word for how long it stays is half-life, and it is a gentle idea. The half-life of a substance is simply the time it takes your body to clear away half of what is present. Then, in the next stretch of the same length, half of what remains. Then half again. It does not leave all at once, like a guest who stands up and walks out. It leaves like a crowd thinning out of a stadium, fast at first, then a lingering few who cannot find their car. For caffeine, the average half-life in an adult is about 5 hours. So if you take in a certain amount at 8 in the morning, then somewhere around 1 in the afternoon, roughly half of it is still circulating, still occupying locks, still telling adenosine to wait outside. Around 6 in the evening, a quarter is still there. You can begin to see, without any mystery hormones at all, why an afternoon can feel the way it feels, and why the coffee you had at lunch is still faintly with you at dinner. But 5 hours is only the average, and the average is where the truth goes to hide. The actual range across healthy adults runs from about 1.5 hours all the way out to 9.5 hours. Sit with the size of that. 2 people can drink the exact same cup at the exact same minute, and in one of them it is mostly gone before lunch, while in the other it is still half present when the evening news would come on. That is not a small difference in degree. That is a different drug living in 2 different people. The identical coffee is a brief pick-me-up for one and an all-day resident for the other, and neither of them has done anything wrong. They were simply built differently at a level far below anything a clock on the wall could ever detect. What decides which one you are? Mostly a single liver enzyme, a little molecular machine that goes by the name of the cytochrome, and specifically the one the pharmacologists label 1A2. This enzyme is the demolition crew for caffeine. It takes the molecule apart. And the gene that specifies how much of this crew you have, and how briskly it works, comes in different versions from person to person. Some of us inherited a fast crew, tearing caffeine down at a good clip, and for us the half-life sits toward the short end. Some of us inherited a slow crew, ambling through the job, and for us the caffeine lingers and lingers. This is written into you from birth. It is not a habit you can fix by drinking your coffee at 9:30 instead of 8. You cannot outschedule your own liver, and the very same crew can be sped up or slowed down by other things in your life, which is why the number refuses to stay put even within one person. In a woman in the last third of pregnancy, that caffeine half-life can stretch out to something near 15 hours, 3 times the usual, because the machinery for clearing it is turned way down. And in a person who smokes, the half-life drops by roughly half, because the smoke revs that same demolition crew into working faster. So the same cup that fades in a few hours for one person hangs on for the better part of a day in another. And the difference has nothing at all to do with waiting 90 minutes after waking. It has to do with genetics, with pregnancy, with tobacco, with the deep individual chemistry of the person holding the mug. The rule offered everyone one number. The body was busy handing out millions. And I have not even told you the part that stretches the whole thing longer still, quietly, in the background. When that liver crew takes caffeine apart, it does not turn it into nothing. It breaks it into 3 smaller cousins, 3 related molecules, and the pharmacologists have names for all of them, though only one matters much for our story. More than 80% of the caffeine you drink gets converted into a molecule called paraxanthine. And here is the quiet twist. Paraxanthine is not inert. It is not a harmless piece of debris. It clamps onto those same adenosine locks with an affinity comparable to caffeine's own. It does much the same job. And it carries its own half-life, somewhere in the range of 3 to 5 hours. So think about what that really means for your afternoon. You drink your coffee. The caffeine goes to work and slowly gets dismantled. But as it is dismantled, it is being turned, in large part, into a second wakefulness molecule that then has to be cleared on its own separate schedule. The effect does not end when the caffeine ends. There is a relay. Caffeine hands the baton to paraxanthine, and paraxanthine keeps running. The practical duration of what you would loosely call the caffeine feeling reaches well past the life of the caffeine molecule itself, because a fresh runner took over partway through the race. This is why the honest picture of your afternoon is not a single clean curve rising and falling. It is caffeine layered over its own offspring, 2 overlapping tides, both pulling on the same shoreline, both governed by that same variable liver crew that no 2 of us inherited quite alike. Do you feel how far we have already traveled from 90 minutes? We started with one number that was supposed to fit every human being who ever woke up wanting coffee. And the moment we picked up the real materials, the number shattered into a whole spread of numbers, personal ones, running from an hour and a half to 9.5 hours, bent further by your genes, your pregnancy, your smoke, and doubled up by a second molecule that the first one turns into. The tidy rule promised to hand you your afternoon on a schedule. The real chemistry hands you your afternoon on a fingerprint. And we still have not asked the 2-process model what it thinks the crash actually is, which is where I want to take you next, gently. Because that is where the sleep pressure you have been building since the moment your eyes opened finally gets to speak for itself. So let us go there together now, into the 2-process model, which is really just a way of drawing the sleepiness in your body as 2 separate lines on the same page. A fellow named Alexander Borbley laid this out in 1982, and it is one of those ideas that once you see it, you cannot unsee it in yourself. He said, look, your urge to sleep is not one thing. It is 2 things, quietly adding together, and they have almost nothing to do with each other. He called the first one process S, the letter S, for sleep, or you might think of it as the pressure. And he called the second one process C, the letter C, for circadian, which is just the fancy word for the clock inside you that runs on roughly a 24-hour beat, whether you feed it clues or not. Picture process S as sand. From the instant you open your eyes in the morning, sand begins to fall grain by grain into the bottom of a glass. That sand is adenosine, the very molecule we have been circling all this time, piling up in the basal forebrain and in the little wake-promoting regions of your brain, accumulating across every hour you stay awake. It does not rush. It does not care what you had for breakfast. It simply accumulates hour after hour, and the higher it piles, the heavier your eyelids feel, and the more your brain begs to lie down. This is the debt. This is the pressure. And here is the part people forget when they get excited about their morning ritual. Nothing you drink first thing empties that glass. The only thing that empties the glass of sand is sleep itself. During the night while you are lying there, your brain clears the adenosine away, tips the glass out, and you wake with it nearly empty. That emptying is the whole point of sleeping. Coffee cannot do it. Coffee, remember, only stands in front of the receptors and blocks the doorway. The sand is still there, still piling, still counting. You have simply put a bouncer at the door so the sand cannot get its message through for a while. Now lay the second line over the first. Press C, the clock. This one does not pile up or drain. It rides up and down like a slow wave across the day, a wave that has been running since long before you had any say in it. It rises, it dips, it rises again, on its own schedule, driven by that master timer deep in your head that takes its cues from light and from habit, but ultimately marches to its own drum. And the crucial thing about this circadian wave is that it has a trough. There is a stretch in the early afternoon for most people where the alerting signal from the clock sags. The clock, which had been quietly holding you upright all morning, eases off. It stops pushing quite so hard. Do you see what happens when you put the two together? All morning the sand has been falling, so your sleep pressure has been slowly climbing the whole time. And now, in the early afternoon, precisely when that pressure has built to a respectable pile, the clock chooses that same window to relax its grip. The one thing that was propping you up steps back at the very moment the load on your shoulders is heaviest. Two lines that had been leaning against each other suddenly stop cooperating. That is your afternoon dip. That is the famous crash. It is not a punishment for drinking coffee at the wrong minute. It is not a bill that came due because you skipped the sacred waiting period. It is the arithmetic of two independent processes. One that has been quietly accumulating since dawn and one that swings on a schedule older than your habits, meeting in a valley in the middle of your day. And I want you to sit with how completely this rewrites the little morning drama we started with. The 90-minute rule told a story in which your afternoon was decided at breakfast by a single choice made in a single window, as if the whole day balanced on the tip of one decision. But Precious S has been falling as sand since you sat up in bed, and it will keep falling whether your first sip came at 6 o'clock or at 9:30. Precious C will reach its trough at roughly the same hour no matter what mug you are holding when the sun came up. The crash was scheduled by your biology before you ever reached the kitchen. Your coffee timing is a pebble tossed into a river that was already flowing exactly where it was going to flow. That is not to say that caffeine does nothing to the crash. It does something, but it does it the way we already described. When the doorway is blocked, the piling adenosine cannot deliver its full message of tiredness, so for a stretch the dip feels softer, muffled, held at arm's length. But the sand does not stop falling while the bouncer is at the door. It keeps stacking up behind him. And as your liver crew, that variable crew, works through the caffeine and clears it away, the bouncer thins out and finally leaves. Now the doorway is open again, and behind it stands not the ordinary pile you would have had, but hours of accumulated sand that never got to speak. All those messages arrive at once. That is the other flavor of crash, the rebound kind, where the tiredness you postponed comes collecting with a little interest. And notice, that timing has nothing to do with when after waking you drank. It has to do with how long your particular liver takes to lower the caffeine, which is the fingerprint we spent so long on. One person feels that door swing open 4 hours after the cup. Another, with a slow crew, still has the bouncer half in place 9 hours later, blocking the doorway right into the evening, keeping the sand out precisely when they are trying to fall asleep and empty the glass for real. So the two-process model does something rather beautiful and rather humbling at the same time. It takes the crash, which felt like a personal failing you might outsmart with clever scheduling, and it shows you that the crash is mostly the honest sum of how long you have been awake and where your inner clock happens to be in its daily swing. The lever you were told to pull, the 90-minute lever, is not connected to the machine that makes the dip. It is connected, at most, to a curtain in front of the machine. I find it worth pausing on why the sand keeps falling regardless. People sometimes imagine that if they simply block enough adenosine, they have somehow paid off the sleep debt, as though caffeine were rest in a cup. It is not. Think of a smoke detector with a piece of tape over it. The tape does not put out the fire. It does not clear the smoke. It only stops the alarm from ringing. The smoke keeps thickening in the room the whole time the tape is on, and the moment you peel it off, The alarm shrieks louder than it ever would have, because now there is a great deal more smoke to shriek about. Caffeine is tape over the smoke detector of your tiredness. The fire it is meant to warn you about, the accumulating need for sleep, goes right on building behind it, indifferent to the tape, indifferent to what hour you applied it. And the clock, presses C, is the part that the 90-minute rule never even mentioned, which is telling. Because the whole folk story was about hormones and molecules in the first hour after waking, cortisol here, adenosine there, all crammed into that opening window. But half of your crash is written by a wave that does not care about your first hour at all. That circadian trough would come for you if you never touched coffee in your life. Ask anyone who has given up caffeine entirely. They still feel the early afternoon soften around them, still feel the pull toward a quiet room and closed eyes, because that pull was never coffee's doing. It was the clock dipping and the sand piling, meeting in their valley, right on time. There is one more thing the two-process picture quietly explains, and it is the reason a nap works when it works. If the crash is high sand meeting low clock, then even a short sleep, 20 minutes, will let your brain tip a little of that sand back out of the glass, drop the pressure, and the dip lifts. No amount of caffeine can do that, because caffeine never touches the glass, only the door. This is why a person can drink cup after cup through a sagging afternoon and still feel the fog thicken, while a brief lie-down cuts through it. The nap addresses the actual quantity. The coffee only argues with the messenger. So we have taken the crash apart and found no 90-minute lever inside it anywhere. We have found sand and a clock and a piece of tape, and a liver crew whose speed decides when the tape comes off. That is the honest machinery. And yet I promised you a twist, something I have been holding back, because after we have demolished the tidy rule and rebuilt the messy truth, there is a genuine surprise waiting in the data about when people drink their coffee. Not the first 90 minutes, the whole shape of the day. And it comes from following 40,000 people for the better part of a decade, which is where I would like to walk with you now. Picture the way a careful person gathers this kind of thing. You do not grab a handful of people and ask them what they had for breakfast and call it science. You reach into a great long record, kept year after year, of ordinary Americans, what they ate, what they drank, what their hearts were doing, and you follow the same people forward through time, patiently, watching. In this case, the record is a big national health survey that ran from the tail end of the 1990s all the way through the following 2 decades, and out of it the researchers pulled a group of 40,725 adults. Then they waited. The middle of the waiting, the median, was about 9.8 years, almost a decade of just watching to see what happens to people. And in that span, sadly but inevitably, some of them died. 4,295 deaths in all. Of those, 1,268 were from the heart and the blood vessels, the cardiovascular deaths. 934 were from cancer. I tell you these raw counts on purpose, because the numbers people usually repeat are the tidy percentages, and I want you to feel that underneath every percentage there are real people, real hearts that stopped. That is what makes this kind of study heavy and worth taking seriously. You are not counting opinions, you are counting lives. Now here is what they did that was clever, and it is the whole reason I have been saving this for the end. They did not just sort people into coffee drinkers and non-coffee drinkers, which is the sorting everybody does and which almost never teaches you anything new. They sorted by the shape of the day. When did you drink it? Was it a morning thing, done and finished before lunch, or did you sip it steadily from waking until evening? 2 patterns. Same drink, same bean, same chemistry, the same caffeine, locking onto the same little doors we have been talking about for 2 hours. The only difference was the clock on the wall when you drank it. And the 2 patterns did not come out the same. That is the surprise. The people who drank their coffee in the morning and then stopped, the morning-only drinkers, had about 16% lower risk of dying from any cause at all over that decade, compared with people who drank no coffee. 16%. And when you look specifically at the heart, at cardiovascular death, the gap opened wider. 31% lower, nearly a third less likely to die of heart trouble than the folks who drank none. Then you turn to the other group, the all-day drinkers. The ones with a mug always somewhere within arm's reach, refilling at 3 in the afternoon, topping up at dinner. You would think, more coffee, more of whatever good thing coffee is doing, more benefit. And you would be wrong. The all-day pattern showed no clear benefit at all. The numbers drifted so close to no effect that a careful person will not claim a real difference. Same total amount of coffee in many cases, same caffeine, but spread across the whole day, and the advantage simply evaporates. Sit with how strange that is for a moment, quietly, the way you would turn a smooth stone over in your hand in the dark. The thing that mattered was not how much. It was when. The dose did not decide the outcome. The timing did. Which is almost funny, because timing is exactly what the 90-minute rule was about, and we spent all this time showing that its particular timing claim, the wait after waking business, had nothing under it. And now the data turns around and says, gently, timing does matter, just not the timing you were arguing about. Not the first 90 minutes. The last 12 hours. I want to be very honest with you here, more honest than the headlines usually are, because this is the place where it is easy to fool yourself, and the first principle is that you must not fool yourself. This is what we call an observational study. Nobody assigned these people to drink coffee only in the morning. The people chose that for themselves. And people who naturally stop drinking coffee after lunch might be different in 100 other ways from people who drink it all day long. Maybe the all-day drinkers were more tired to begin with, and that is why they kept reaching for it, and the tiredness itself came from something that was already wrong. Maybe the afternoon and evening coffee was disturbing their sleep, and it was the wrecked sleep doing the damage, not the coffee in itself. The study cannot tell you which. It can show you the two shapes and the gap between them. It cannot hand you the reason. So I am not going to stand here and tell you that an afternoon cup will hurt your heart. The evidence does not go that far, and I will not pretend it does. What I will say is this. Here at last is a real, careful, large piece of work that connects the clock and the coffee to something that genuinely matters, something as serious as living or dying, and its finding points in almost the opposite direction from the fork rule. The fork rule fusses over the front edge of the day, the 90 minutes after your eyes open, a window where we found nothing to fuss about. The real signal, such as it is, lives at the back edge of the day, the afternoon and the evening, the hours the fork rule never even mentioned. And notice how nicely, how quietly, this fits with everything we built up when we tore the rule apart and put the true machinery back together. Remember the liver crew and the half-life, the roughly 5 hours on average for the caffeine itself, and then the second character, paraxanthine, the main thing your body turns caffeine into, carrying its own 3 to 5 hour half-life, still binding those same adenosine doors, still holding the messenger back. Add those up and you see why a cup at 3 in the afternoon is not really an afternoon event at all. It is an evening event and a bedtime event wearing an afternoon disguise. The caffeine and its offspring are still circulating, still jamming the doors, when the clock in your head, presses C, is trying to hand you over to sleep. The sand of the day, presses S, all that adenosine you piled up across 16 waking hours, is pounding on those doors wanting to be let through so you can finally rest. And you have taped a good number of the doors shut right at the moment you most need them open. That is not a crash. That is worse than a crash. That is a night of sleep quietly shaved thinner than it should be, adenosine not fully cleared because you did not sleep quite deeply or quite long enough, so you wake with a little residue of yesterday's sand still in the glass. And what do you reach for to fight that residue? More coffee. And now perhaps you understand, in the belly and not just the head, why an all-day pattern might slowly, over years, over a decade of mornings, fail to give you the gift that a morning-only pattern gives. Not because the afternoon cup is poison. Because the afternoon cup borrows from the night, and the night is where the real repair happens, where the sand truly drains away. The morning-only drinker, by contrast, is working with the grain of the body instead of against it. They put the caffeine in when presses C is already lifting them toward alertness, ride the wakefulness through the productive part of the day, and then, crucially, they let it clear. By the time evening comes and the circadian clock begins its long, slow bow towards sleep, the doors are mostly free again. The messenger, adenosine, can be heard. The night does its work. The glass empties. And they wake genuinely rested, which is the only thing in this entire 3-hour story that actually resets the crash at its source. You see what has happened to our picture. We started with a single number, 90 minutes, offered as the secret lever. We found the lever was attached to nothing. And now, having thrown it away, we find the clock did matter all along, only on a scale of hours and a whole day, not minutes after waking, and tangled up with sleep, with genetics, with how much you already drink, in a way no single number could ever capture. The tidy rule pointed at the wrong end of the day and promised too much. The messy truth points at the whole day and promises less, but what it promises, it can nearly deliver. I do not want to overstate it. I have spent my life being suspicious of stories that are too satisfying, and I am suspicious of this one too, a little, because it is satisfying, and satisfaction is precisely the feeling that should make a careful mind slow down and check its footing. One study, however large, however long, is one study. It found a correlation, not a mechanism proved in a controlled trial. Somebody will follow it up. Somebody should. Maybe it will hold and maybe it will shrink under harder looking, the way many bold findings do. That is not a weakness of the science. That is the science working, the endless patient checking, the refusal to let any single result become a new commandment. And yet, even holding all that suspicion in one hand, I find in the other hand something worth carrying home. That when it comes to coffee, the interesting question was never the first 90 minutes at all. Let me sit with that for a while, because it is the kind of turn that deserves a slow walk around it. For weeks, for months, people have been staring at the doorway, arguing about exactly when to step through it, and it turns out the whole house was more interesting than the threshold. The first sip, early or late, matters far less than the shape of the whole day of sipping. And that is a strange and lovely correction, because it takes a small anxious question, when do I drink, and swaps it for a large gentle one, how do I live with this drug across all my waking hours? I say drug and I mean it kindly. Coffee is a drug the way bread is a food and a warm bath is a medicine. But it is a drug, and drugs have arithmetic, and the arithmetic is what we have been doing all along without naming it. So let me name it plainly now, because I think the naming is where the comfort lives. Picture the amount of caffeine in your blood as the level of water in a bathtub. Every cup you drink is a pour from the tap, and the drain, the thing that lets the water out, is your liver, working at a pace set mostly by that one busy enzyme we talked about, the one some of you carry in a fast version and some in a slow version. Now here is the thing the 90-minute story never told you. If you take your first pour at dawn and the tub drains at the average rate so that the water level halves in about 5 hours, then by mid-afternoon you still have a meaningful puddle sloshing around in there from the morning alone. And if you have been topping the tub up all day, one pour at breakfast, one after lunch, one at 3 in the afternoon because the meeting would not end, then you are not draining anything. You are running the tap to match the drain, and the water never really goes down, and it is still up around your ankles when you lie down at night wondering why the ceiling seems so interesting. That picture, the tub and the tap and the lazy drain, explains more about your afternoon than any rule about the first 90 minutes ever could. Because the crash people feel, that heavy fog that rolls in somewhere between 2 and 4 in the afternoon was never really the coffee's doing in the first place. Remember what we built earlier. The two great processes grinding against each other, the pressure to sleep piling up like sand in the lower half of the hourglass, hour after waking hour, as that little molecule accumulates in the quiet corners of the brain. And laid over it, the circadian wave, the daily tide that the body runs whether you drink anything or not, a tide that happens to ebb in the early afternoon for almost everybody. That dip is written into you. It was there before coffee was invented. It was there when your ancestors were dozing in the shade after a long morning. The afternoon lull is not a malfunction. It is a feature of the machine, a soft valley in the daily landscape that the body walks through every single day. What coffee does, all coffee does, is lay a plank across that valley so you do not feel yourself descend into it. The caffeine sits in the doorway of those receptors, the ones the sleepy molecule wants to dock into, and it holds the door shut, and the message that you are tired cannot be delivered even though it is being shouted. but the sand is still falling in the hourglass the whole time. The pressure to sleep does not go away because you cannot feel it. It waits. And when the caffeine finally drains out of the tub, when the plank is pulled away, you step off the end of it and drop straight down into all the tiredness that was accumulating in the dark the entire time you were not paying attention to it. That is your crash. It is not a poison. It is a debt. It is every hour of sleepiness you postponed, arriving at once, with interest, at the moment the drug lets go. Now you can see why moving the first sip by an hour and a half does almost nothing to that. You have not changed how the sand falls. You have not moved the afternoon tide. You have not altered the size of the debt or the moment it comes due. All you have changed is when you first put your hand on the plank. The valley is still there. The debt is still growing. And whether you drank your coffee at 7 in the morning or at 9:30, the sleepy molecule spent the morning piling up all the same, because its response to your waking, as that careful review reminded us, happens on the order of minutes, not hours. The window the rule needed simply is not there to stand in. So what actually moves the needle if not the timing of the first cup? The two things the top pitcher hands you, and they are almost embarrassingly ordinary. The first is how much water you pour in total. The second is how late in the day you keep pouring. Those two, together, decide how deep the puddle is at bedtime, and how deep the puddle is at bedtime decides how well the drain does its real overnight job, which is not draining caffeine at all, but draining that other thing, the sleep pressure, the sand, which only truly empties out when you are unconscious and the brain runs its nightly cleaning. Here is the quiet cruelty of it. If you drink coffee late enough that a little caffeine is still holding those doors shut at night, you do not sleep as deeply, and if you do not sleep as deeply, you do not clear the sand as completely, and you wake with the hourglass not fully reset, already a little tired before the day has started, reaching for the very cup that helped cause the problem. It is a loop, a gentle spiral, and you can be halfway down it without ever noticing, because each morning the coffee papers over the deficit the previous evening's coffee helped create. And that, I think, is the real reason the picture from that big long study fits so snugly against the mechanics we built by hand. Remember what it found. The people who drank their coffee only in the morning did better than the people who never drank coffee at all, and much better than the people who drank it around the clock. For years, everyone wanted to know the exact minute to start. But the number that seemed to matter was closer to the minute to stop. The morning-only drinkers were the ones who let the tub drain in the afternoon and the evening, who gave the overnight cleaning crew a clean floor to work on. The all-day drinkers kept the tap running into the hours when the drain most needed to do its other work. Now I hold that finding loosely, the way I told you I would, because it is one study and it watched people, it did not assign them, and watching is weaker than assigning. But the direction of it rhymes with everything the tub and the hourglass predict, and when a careful measurement rhymes with a mechanism you built from separate pieces, you are allowed to lean on it a little, gently. The way you lean on a railing you are still testing with your weight. I want to pause here and admire honestly why the 90-minute rule was so seductive in the first place. Because there is a lesson in the seduction that is bigger than coffee. It gave you a number. A single, crisp, memorable number that you could act on before you had finished yawning. And the human mind loves a number it can obey. It feels like control. It feels like mastery over a body that is otherwise a fog of hormones and half-understood chemistry. The rule said, do this one thing at this one time, and the afternoon will be yours. And who would not want that? But the body is not built out of single numbers. It is built out of interacting curves, hormones rising and falling on their own schedules, receptors filling and emptying, a liver enzyme that runs 3 times faster in your neighbor than in you, tolerance quietly filing down, the very effect the rule was trying to exploit. A real answer to a question about the body almost never comes back as a number you can tape to the refrigerator. It comes back as, well, it depends. And here is what it depends on, and here is how to think about your own case. That is a worse slogan and a far better truth. Think of how many of the pieces we have gathered refuse to line up behind one clean time. The sleepy molecule answers waking in minutes. The stress hormone crests within an hour whatever you do, and if you are a regular drinker, it barely notices the coffee at all, because habit has sanded that response down to almost nothing. And at a good strong daily habit, it may be gone entirely. The drug itself lingers for 5 hours in an average body, and anywhere from an hour and a half to most of a working day, depending on which version of one gene you happen to inherit from your parents. And then it hands its work off to a daughter molecule that keeps blocking those same doors for hours more, so that the effect outlives the caffeine that started it. Try to draw one vertical line through all of that, one perfect moment to raise the cup, and the pieces slide out from under your ruler in every direction. There is no line. There was never going to be a line. There is only a shape, and the shape is different for every person holding a mug, which brings me back, as these things tend to you, and to the ordinary cup cooling in front of you right now, or the one you will pour tomorrow before your eyes are fully open. The honest thing I can tell you is not a time. It is a way of paying attention. Watch yourself for a week, not with a stopwatch, not with a chart pinned to the refrigerator, just with the quiet corner of your mind that notices things. Notice when the heaviness comes. Notice whether your second cup lands like a friend or like a stranger who has overstayed. Notice whether you sleep well on the nights you drank coffee after the afternoon, and whether you sleep just as well on the nights you did not. You are, whether you signed up for it or not, the only laboratory in the world equipped to study the one metabolism you actually have to live inside. Nobody publishes your results, nobody peer reviews your evenings. But the data is streaming past you every single day, free of charge, and most people never once bother to read it. I want to sit with that idea a while, because it is easy to say and hard to really feel. We are taught to trust the number that comes from far away, the number in the headline, the number a stranger measured on 1,000 other people. And that number is precious. I would never wave it off. When somebody follows 40,725 human beings for the better part of a decade, that is a mountain of careful work, and it tells us something true about crowds. But a crowd is not a person. The average height of a forest tells you almost nothing about the particular oak in your own yard. The study can say, with real confidence, that people who kept their coffee to the morning tended to do better than people who sipped it all day long. It cannot walk into your kitchen and tell you which oak you are. Here is where the one gene comes back to haunt the whole tidy story. That liver enzyme, the one with the clumsy name, the cytochrome that chews up more than 80% of the caffeine you swallow and turns it into that stubborn daughter molecule. Some people carry a version of it that works fast, and some carry a version that works slow, and the difference is not small. It is the difference between clearing half your caffeine in about an hour and a half and clearing half of it in 9.5 hours. Sit with those two numbers for a second. 9.5 divided by 1.5. The slow person is walking around with the drug in their blood something like 6 times longer than the fast person, from the very same cup, poured at the very same minute of the very same morning. Imagine two friends. They wake at the same hour. They pour from the same pot. They are the same age, the same size. They eat more or less the same breakfast. One of them is a fast burner, and one is a slow burner, and neither of them has any idea which is which, because you cannot feel your own enzymes the way you feel your own pulse. By early afternoon, the fast burner has almost nothing left in the tank. The caffeine has come and gone like a summer shower, and if she feels a crash, it is not the coffee wearing off in some dramatic way. It is simply the ordinary tide of sleep pressure rising, the sand piling up in the hourglass the way it does in everyone who has been awake since dawn. Her friend, the slow burner, is a different animal entirely. His morning cup is still working at 2 in the afternoon. It is still working at 4. If he tops it off at lunch, the way people do, he is now stacking a fresh dose on top of a dose that never really left, and by the time he lies down at night there is still a whisper of it circling in his blood, propping those little doors open, keeping the sleepiness, politely waiting at the threshold. He sleeps a little worse. He wakes a little more tired. He reaches, quite reasonably, for a bigger cup. And the whole thing turns, gently, like a wheel that never quite comes to rest. Neither of these people is doing anything wrong. Neither of them broke a rule. They followed the exact same instructions, and the instructions meant two completely different things inside two completely different bodies. That is the part the 90-minute rule can never survive contact with. A rule that gives one number pretends there is one body. And there is no one body. There is a fast burner and a slow burner and everyone in between, and pregnancy stretching the clock out toward 15 hours, and the smoker burning it off in half the usual time without ever meaning to, and the habitual drinker whose whole hormonal seesaw has quietly stopped responding to the drug the way a novice's would. Every one of those wrinkles is real, and every one of them shoves the supposed perfect moment somewhere else. Line them all up and ask them to agree on a single instant to lift the cup, and they will look at you the way a crowd of strangers looks at you when you ask them all to sneeze at once. Now, I can hear the objection forming, because it is a good one, and I would raise it myself. If it is all so individual, so slippery, so different from person to person, then what good is any of this? Why learn the machinery at all if the machinery refuses to hand you a rule you can tape to the wall? And my answer is that understanding the machinery is precisely what frees you from needing the wall. When you know that the crash is mostly sleep pressure and the daily arc of your own clock and only partly the drug, you stop blaming the coffee for a tiredness the coffee never caused. When you know that a regular drinker barely gets a cortisol bump, you stop worrying about a hormonal spike that is, for you, mostly already gone. When you know the caffeine you drank at noon may still be talking to your brain at bedtime, you have a real mechanical reason to think twice about the afternoon refill. A reason that has nothing to do with a blog post and everything to do with a half-life you can actually reason about. Knowledge does not always come as a rule. Sometimes it comes as the end of a rule and the beginning of judgment. There is a deeper pleasure hiding in here too, and I do not want us to rush past it on the way to being practical. Look at what the body is doing. It is running at least 3 clocks at once, and it is running them without any conductor waving a baton out in front. There is the fast clock, the surge of that waking hormone climbing and cresting in the first half hour or hour after your eyes open, whether you drink anything or not. There is the slow tide, the sleep pressure that has been building the whole time you were awake yesterday that got drained out overnight while you slept, and that starts filling again the moment you rise. And laced over both of those there is the great daily wheel, the roughly 24-hour rhythm that does not care what you did this morning, that would dip you toward drowsiness in the early afternoon even if you had never heard the word coffee, even if the plant it comes from had never grown. 3 rhythms on 3 different time skulls, all overlapping, all interfering with one another like ripples from 3 stones thrown into the same pond. The afternoon dip you feel is where those ripples happen to cross. That is not a bug in the system that a well-timed cup is meant to patch. That is the system working exactly as it was built to work over millions of years, long before anyone roasted a bean. The dip was there first. The coffee arrived late, an uninvited guest at a party the body had been throwing for ages, and all the coffee does is lean on one of the doors while the party goes on around it. When you picture it that way, the whole question flips over in your hands. The interesting thing was never when to drink the coffee. The interesting thing is the party. The interesting thing is that you are a creature with an hourglass in your head made of a molecule that piles up while you think and drains away while you dream, and a wheel in your chest that turns on the same beat as the spinning of the planet, and a fast little alarm that goes off in your blood before you have even decided to get out of bed. You have been carrying all of that machinery through every ordinary morning of your life, and mostly you noticed only the mug. So when I say the honest answer is a way of paying attention rather than a time, this is what I mean. Pay attention to the hourglass, and you will start to feel the difference between real sleep debt and a passing dip. Pay attention to the wheel, and the afternoon heaviness stops feeling like a personal failure and starts feeling like weather, something that arrives on schedule and passes on schedule. Pay attention to your own particular burner, fast or slow, by watching how the evening treats you, and you will learn more about your own metabolism from one thoughtful week than any single rule could ever tell you. The universe did not hand you a number. It handed you a set of instruments and a lifetime of quiet mornings in which to read them. That is a far stranger gift than a rule, and a far better one, and we have only just begun to turn it over and see how the light catches it. Let me linger a little longer on that word, weather, because I think it hides something worth digging up. When you say the afternoon heaviness is like weather, you might hear that as a soft thing, a poetic thing, a way of shrugging, but weather is not soft at all. Weather is the most stubbornly physical thing there is. It follows pressure and temperature and the turning of the planet, and it does not care one bit what you wish for on the morning of your picnic. So when I hand you weather as the picture for your afternoon crash, I am not handing you a metaphor to comfort you. I am handing you a machine, and a machine can be studied, and a machine can be predicted, at least in its broad strokes, even when the fine details stay slippery. So let us study the machine of the crash properly, now that we have cleared away the false rule that pretended to control it. You remember the two processes. One of them, the one I call the hourglass, is the slow piling up of sleep pressure across the hours you stay awake. Adenosine gathers in the wake-promoting corners of the brain, in the basal forebrain, the longer you are up, and it does not care what hour your alarm went off. It only counts hours awake. That is the sand. And the sand only empties out during sleep. That is the whole trick of it. You cannot pour the sand back into the top of the glass by drinking anything. You can only put a little cap over the opening, which is what the caffeine does, so the sand keeps falling but you stop feeling it land. The other process, the one I call the wheel, is the circadian clock, turning through its roughly 24-hour cycle whether you sleep or not, whether you eat or not, largely following the light. And here is the part people forget when they blame their coffee for the afternoon slump. That wheel has a dip built into it. In the early to middle afternoon, the circadian signal that has been holding you alert through the morning eases off for a stretch before it climbs again toward the evening. So in the afternoon, you get two things happening at once. The sand has been falling for many hours, so the pressure to sleep is genuinely high, and the wheel is in one of its low arcs, so the counter pressure that was propping you up has softened. Put those together, high sand and a low arc of the wheel, and you get a trough. That trough is your crash. It was going to be there. It was scheduled by two systems that began their day the moment you opened your eyes, and neither of them was waiting on your first sip to decide what to do. Now watch what this does to the whole 90-minute story seen from the far side. The rule promised you that by waiting, by letting some window pass before you drank, you could reach across the entire day and soften a dip that happens 6, 7, 8 hours later. But the dip is made of sand that has been falling all day and a wheel that turns on the sun. The moment of your first sip is a tiny event near the top of the day. It is one pebble tossed into a river that is already running toward the sea. The river will reach the sea in the afternoon no matter where you stand on the bank in the morning. That is why the honest people who studied this could say the basis for the timing claim was completely lacking. Not because timing never matters for anything, but because the thing the rule promised to fix was never the thing the timing could touch. And yet, and this is the part I find genuinely lovely, timing does turn out to matter. Just not in the way the rule said, and not for the reason the rule gave. Let me build that up carefully, because it is the twist I have been saving, and I want it to arrive gently rather than all at once. Think about caffeine leaving your body. We said the average half-life in a grown adult is about 5 hours, which means that if you drink a certain amount, then 5 hours later roughly half of it is still circulating, and 5 hours after that a quarter, and so on, tapering off in that slow, patient way that halving always does. But we also said that average hides an enormous spread. One person clears their caffeine in as little as an hour and a half. Another person, sitting at the very same table drinking the very same cup, takes 9.5 hours to bring it down by half. Most of that difference comes down to a single liver enzyme, the one called CYP1A2, and the particular version of it your genes happen to build. Fast burners and slow burners, at the same breakfast table, living in two different chemical afternoons. Now carry that forward through the day. Suppose you are a slow burner, and suppose you drink your coffee not in the early morning but in the middle of it, and then again after lunch to fight that very afternoon dip we just described. The half-life stretches the effect long past the last sip, and there is more, because caffeine does not simply vanish when the liver takes it apart. It gets turned mostly into paraxanthine, more than 80% of it, and paraxanthine is no bystander. It grabs onto the same adenosine receptors with much the same strength, and it carries its own half-life of something like 3 to 5 hours. So the practical caffeine effect, the real one your brain feels, lasts longer than the caffeine molecule itself. You are being kept awake not only by what you drank, but by the ghost of what you drank, the daughter molecule doing the parent's work for hours after. Put those two things together, the long tail of a slow burner and the persistence of paraxanthine, and you can see the shape of a real problem that has nothing to do with cortisol at 9 in the morning. If you keep drinking coffee across the whole day, into the afternoon and the early evening, some of that caffeine and its patient daughter are still sitting on your adenosine receptors when the night comes. And now the cap you put over the hourglass in the morning is still in place at bedtime. The sand wants to empty. It has been falling for 16 hours and it is heavy and ready, but the cap is still there, keeping you from feeling it, keeping you from crossing over into sleep as easily as you should. You sleep a little worse. You clear a little less adenosine overnight. And you wake with more sand already in the glass than you should have, so the next day's climb toward the crash starts from higher up. Do that day after day, and you have built a small machine that quietly steals from your nights to pay for your afternoons. So the question that actually has teeth is not, should I wait 90 minutes after waking? The question with teeth is, how late in the day am I still drinking this stuff, and how slow is my particular burner at putting it down? That is a real timing question. It lives in the evening, not the first hour of the morning. And it points, at last, toward the strangest and most interesting thing anyone has measured about all this, which I have been holding in my pocket this whole time, waiting for the right moment to set it on the table. Because someone did go and look, not at when people take their first sip, but at when across the day they drink their coffee at all. And then at what happens to those people over years. Not over an afternoon, over years. They took a great pile of records, tens of thousands of adults in the United States, tracked through a long national health survey, and they sorted them by pattern. Some people drank their coffee only in the morning and then stopped. Other people drank it all day long, morning, afternoon, into the evening. And then they waited, and they counted, with the follow-up stretching out to a median of nearly 10 years, long enough for the slow accounting of a life to show itself. I want to walk into that result slowly, because it is the kind of thing that is easy to say too fast and get wrong, and I have spent this whole talk trying to teach you to distrust things said too fast. So we will take it apart carefully. We will ask who was in this study, and what exactly was measured, and what the numbers can honestly tell us, and what they cannot. Because a number about tens of thousands of people over 10 years is a powerful thing and a treacherous thing at the very same time. And knowing the difference between those two faces of it is most of what it means to think like a scientist at all. Let me pour one more cup, figuratively speaking, and we will sit with these 40,000 strangers and their morning and all-day habits, and see what the long, patient arithmetic of their lives was quietly trying to tell us about our own. So who were these people? They were adults living in the United States, gathered up into a big long-running health survey. The sort of patient national bookkeeping where you sit down with tens of thousands of ordinary people and you ask them plainly, what do you eat? What do you drink? When do you drink it? And then you do the quiet, almost eerie thing of following them forward through the years to see what becomes of them. 40,725 of them all told. And the people running this study did something clever, something that had not really been done before with coffee. They did not just ask how much. They asked when. They sorted these 40,000 strangers by the shape of their coffee habit across the day. Some of them drank their coffee in the morning and then stopped. Others drank it all day long, morning, noon, afternoon, trailing on into the evening. And then they watched for a middle stretch of nearly 10 years to see who was still here. I want you to feel the weight of that word. 10 years. Not a week in a laboratory with wires taped to your scalp. Not an afternoon of spitting into little tubes so somebody can measure your cortisol. 10 years of a life lived out in kitchens and cars and workplaces with all its accidents and illnesses and slow accumulations. Over that stretch, in this group of 40,000, there were 4,295 deaths. That is the somber arithmetic underneath all of this. Of those, 1,268 were from the heart and the blood vessels, what the doctors lump together as cardiovascular. 934 were from cancer, and the rest from all the other ways a body can finally stop. These are not abstractions. Each one is a person who filled out a survey about their coffee and then, somewhere down the years, was gone. When we talk about the numbers, let us not forget that the numbers are made of people. Now, here is the thing that made everybody sit up. When they compared the morning-only coffee drinkers to the people who drank no coffee at all, the morning drinkers had a lower chance of dying over that stretch. 16% lower for death from any cause at all. And when they looked just at the heart, just at the cardiovascular deaths, the gap was wider still. 31% lower. That is a big sounding number. A third fewer heart deaths in the morning crowd compared to the coffee abstainers. And you would think, well, coffee is good for you, drink up all day long, the more the merrier. But that is not what the data said. The all-day drinkers, the ones who kept the cup going from dawn to dusk, they showed no clear benefit at all. Their odds looked about the same as the people who drank nothing. The advantage, whatever it was, seemed to belong to the morning drinkers and not to the all-day drinkers. Same drink, same caffeine, different clock. And the clock apparently was where the difference lived. Now I have to slow you down, because your mind is already galloping ahead, and it is galloping in exactly the direction I spent 2 hours trying to teach you to be suspicious of. Your mind wants to say, aha, so timing is everything, the morning is magic, the 90-minute people were right all along, drink early and live long. Stop. Take a breath. Let us be honest about what this kind of study can and cannot tell us, because this is the very heart of thinking straight, and it is where most people, even clever people, quietly fool themselves. This is what we call an observational study. Nobody assigned these people their coffee habits. Nobody flipped a coin and said, you there, you are a morning drinker now, and you must sip all day. The people chose their own habits, or their habits chose them, long before anyone came asking questions. And that changes everything about what we are allowed to conclude. Because the morning-only drinkers and the all-day drinkers are not the same people with one thing swapped out. They are different people, in 100 quiet ways that all ride along with the coffee. Think for a moment about who drinks coffee all day, right into the evening. Ask yourself, honestly, what kind of life does that? Maybe it is somebody who sleeps badly and reaches for the cup at 4 in the afternoon because they are exhausted and cannot get through. Maybe it is somebody who works long, punishing shifts or works through the night, whose whole body clock is turned upside down. Maybe the late coffee is not the cause of anything at all. Maybe it is a flag, a little colored flag stuck in the ground, marking a life that is already harder on the heart for reasons that have nothing to do with the coffee itself. The coffee did not necessarily wreck their sleep. Their wrecked sleep may be why they drink the coffee. And bad sleep, we have good reason to think, is genuinely hard on the body over the years. Do you see the trap? This is the oldest and most dangerous confusion in all of the sciences that deal with living things. It is the difference between two things happening together and one thing causing the other. The rooster crows and then the sun comes up every single morning without fail, and no rooster in the history of the world ever made the sun rise. When you watch people instead of running a controlled experiment on them, you are always in the presence of roosters. The late coffee crows and the heart trouble follows, and the temptation is overwhelming to say the first made the second. But it may be that both are lit up by the same hidden sun, some shared thing, poor sleep, hard work, ill health, that drives the late drinking and drives the risk both at once. The people who did this study know this perfectly well. They are careful. They try to correct for the obvious differences. They gather up what they know about each person, how old, how heavy, whether they smoke, whether they have money, how they eat, and they do their arithmetic to try and hold all those things steady, so that they are comparing as near as they can manage like with like. And that helps. It genuinely helps. But it can never be perfect, and every honest scientist in this field will tell you so quietly when the lights are low. There is always something you did not measure. There is always a rooster you did not think to account for. So when they report that the morning drinkers did better, they are not handing you a law of nature, they are handing you a clue. An interesting, provocative, well-gathered clue worth chasing. Not a verdict. And notice, please, that this study is not even about the 90-minute rule. Not remotely. The 90-minute rule was a claim about the first hour and a half of your morning, about waiting past your cortisol peak before your very first sip, all to spare you a crash at 3 in the afternoon. This study says nothing about any of that. It does not measure your crash. It did not time anyone's first cup against their waking cortisol. It is comparing morning drinkers against all-day drinkers over 10 years of living and dying. It is a completely different question, at a completely different scale. The 90-minute rule lives in the span of an hour. This study lives in the span of a decade. To take this decade-long heart and death study and wave it around as proof that you should wait 90 minutes for your latte, that is to smash two entirely unrelated things together, because they both happen to have the word morning in them. And that sloppy welding of unlike things is precisely the sort of thinking we have been trying to unlearn all night. So what does it actually leave us with? It leaves us with something honest and something genuinely interesting, and I would not trade honest and interesting for tidy and wrong on any night of the week. It leaves us with a real careful observation that when coffee sits in your day matters, at least as a marker, in a way that the sheer total amount does not seem to. That there may be something about a habit that lets the evening go quiet and coffee-free, something the body appreciates over the long haul, whether that something is the coffee itself or the kind of restful, well-slept life that a coffee-free evening tends to travel with. We do not yet know which. Saying we do not yet know is not a failure. It is the most respectable sentence a scientist owns, and the hardest one to say out loud, and I want you to hear me say it plainly. We do not yet know. But look how far that leaves us from the neat little rule we started with. We began the evening with a single confident number, 90 minutes, a rule you could print on a card. And now, chasing the honest version of the story, we find ourselves out here among 40,000 lives and their roosters and their hidden suns, holding a real clue in our hands that refuses to collapse into a slogan. That is what actually happens every time when you follow a clean rule down to where it really lives. The rule gets messier, and the world gets bigger, and if you have the stomach for it, the mess turns out to be far more beautiful than the rule ever was. So let us stay out here in the mess a little longer and ask what all of it, the cortisol and the adenosine and the half-lives and now these 40,000 mornings, is really telling us about why we ever wanted the rules so badly in the first place. Think for a moment about why we love a rule at all. A rule is a small thing you can carry. You put it in your pocket in the morning and it weighs nothing, and it promises to make 100 future decisions for you before they ever arrive. Wait 90 minutes. There, done. You need never think about it again. And that is an enormous gift, because thinking is expensive and mornings are foggy, and most of us would rather be told than have to work it out fresh each day over a cooling mug. So when somebody hands you a number that sounds like it came from a laboratory dressed up in the good clothes of cortisol and adenosine and receptors, you take it gladly. Of course you do. It saves you the labor of ever looking closely. That is not stupidity. That is the ordinary economy of a busy mind, and I have run my own life on little pocket rules more times than I would like to admit. But nature did not sit down and design your body to be easy to summarize. That is the thing we keep bumping into all evening. Nature built you the way a river builds a delta, by piling up whatever worked, one accident on top of another, over a stretch of time so long the number stops meaning anything to a human being. Nobody stood at a drafting table and decided that cortisol should rise about half again in the first half hour after your eyes open. Nobody voted that adenosine should answer the call of waking in minutes rather than hours. Nobody chose that the little factory in your liver, the one we called CYP1A2, should run fast in some people and slow in others, so that the very same cup of coffee lingers an hour and a half in one body and most of a working day in another. These are not decisions. They are leftovers. They are what remained after an unimaginable stretch of living things being born and eating and sleeping and dying, and the ones whose chemistry happened to serve them a little better, leaving a few more descendants. You are the current draft of that endless editing, and the manuscript is covered in the marks of every previous editor, and none of them were trying to make the thing tidy. So when a tidy rule meets an untidy body, the rule always loses. It has to. It was built for the wrong material. It is like trying to describe the taste of a soup with a single word. You can say salty, and you would not be lying, but the whole point of the soup, the reason anybody made it, is that it is salty and warm and a little sour, and there is something underneath you cannot quite name, and the word salty throws all of that away. The 90-minute rule is the word salty. It caught one true note, the cortisol note, and it sang that one note so clearly and so confidently that people mistook it for the whole song. And here is the part that I find genuinely lovely if you will sit with me in it. The rule was not even wrong in the ordinary way, where somebody makes a mistake and you can point to it. It was wrong in a deeper, sneakier way. It took a collection of real, honest, measured facts, every one of them true on its own, and it assembled them into a machine that does not run. The cortisol awakening response is real. Adenosine building through the day is real. Caffeine sitting down on those receptors is real. Every gear in the story is a genuine gear, but somebody bolted them together in an order that felt like it should turn and never once checked whether the wheels actually moved. That is a far more interesting failure than a simple falsehood, because it can happen to any of us, in any subject, on any evening. You can be right about every single piece and still be wrong about the picture. The pieces do not add up on their own. Somebody has to test whether the whole contraption goes, and that testing is the slow, unglamorous, wonderful thing that separates a story that merely sounds true from one that is. Let me put it another way, because I think it matters more than any single fact we have handled tonight. There is a feeling you get when an explanation clicks, a warm little snap of satisfaction, and that feeling is one of the most dangerous things in all of thinking. It feels exactly the same whether the explanation is correct or not. The click is not a detector of truth, it is a detector of tidiness, of a story whose ends have been tucked in. The 90-minute rule clicks beautifully. It has a villain, the cortisol spike, and a hero, your patience, and a clean reward, no afternoon crash. It is shaped like a fable, and the body, poor honest body, is not shaped like a fable at all. It is shaped like weather. It has fronts and pressures and things that cancel each other out, and a stubborn refusal to do the same thing twice in exactly the same way. When you learn to distrust the click, just a little, just enough to ask one more question before you pocket the rule, you have learned most of what I ever knew about how to think about anything. Notice, too, what the honest picture demands of you that the rule never did. The rule asked nothing. It gave you a number and sent you on your way. But the real story, the one with the fast and slow livers and the blunted response in habitual drinkers and the paraxanthine trailing along behind the caffeine like a second shift clocking in, that story asks you to pay attention to yourself. It asks, how much do you drink? And how long have you been drinking it? And does the afternoon cup keep you up at night or not touch you at all? It turns you from a person receiving instructions into a person running a small, quiet experiment on the only subject you will ever have complete access to. And that, I think, is the trade nobody tells you about when they hand you the pocket rule. The rule saves you the labor of paying attention. But paying attention was the whole prize. The rule sells you convenience and quietly charges you the one thing worth having, which is a real relationship with how your own machine actually runs. I want you to feel how much room there is inside the honest version, because we glimpsed it in those 40,000 mornings, and it is worth lingering on. Somewhere out there is a person whose liver clears caffeine in about 90 minutes, and for them a cup at 2 in the afternoon is gone before supper and troubles nothing. And somewhere else is a person whose half-life runs closer to 9 or 10 hours, so that the same afternoon cup is still half present at midnight, a low tide of caffeine lapping at the shore of their sleep while they lie there wondering why they cannot drift off. Same coffee. Same clock on the wall. 2 entirely different afternoons, 2 entirely different nights, and no single rule on earth could ever be right for both of them at once. When somebody offers you one number for all the world's bodies, they are not offering you science. They are offering you an average wearing the costume of a law. And an average is a fine thing to know, but it is nobody's actual morning. There is no average person waking up tomorrow. There is only you, with your particular liver and your particular habit and your particular sun, and the average has never once met you. That is why the mess is not a disappointment. I know it can feel like one. You came looking for an answer, and I have handed you a spread of possibilities and a shrug where the answer was supposed to be. But look at what the shrug contains. It contains the truth that you are not interchangeable with the person next to you. It contains the reason your friend can drink an espresso after dinner and sleep like a stone while you cannot touch coffee past lunchtime, and neither of you is doing anything wrong. You are simply running different chemistry. The mess is where all the real information lives. The rule threw that information away to fit on a card. The mess kept every bit of it, and if you are willing to hold the mess in your hands and turn it over slowly, it will tell you things about yourself that no rule ever could. So we have taken the clean number apart, and we have found real gears inside it, and we have found that the gears do not turn the way the story claimed. We have wandered out among 40,000 lives and found a clue that will not shrink to a slogan. And now we are standing here with something better than a rule and harder to carry, which is an honest picture of a genuinely complicated thing. The question that remains, the one I want to walk toward as the night grows late, is what you are actually supposed to do tomorrow morning when you are standing in your kitchen and the water is hot, and the honest answer is, it depends. Because it depends is true, but it is not yet useful, and I do not want to leave you with only the truth. I want to leave you with something you can do with it. So let us take the mess we have earned and see whether, without lying, without printing a single false number on a single card, we can turn it back into a morning. So let us build the morning back up, carefully, out of the true parts. The first true part is that you are not a table in a book. Somewhere in the machinery of your liver there is a little worker called by the name CYP1A2, and that worker sets the pace at which caffeine leaves you. In one person, that worker is quick, and the caffeine you drink is half gone in as little as an hour and a half. In another person, that same worker dawdles, and the caffeine lingers so that half of it is still with you 9.5 hours later. The average lands somewhere around 5 hours, but the average is a fiction that describes almost nobody exactly. So the very first thing your true morning asks of you is a question no card can answer for you. Are you a quick one or a slow one? You have data on this. You have been running the experiment your whole life without writing it down. Here is how you read your own results. If you drink a cup in the late afternoon, say around 4 o'clock, and you lie down at 10 and your mind will not turn off, if you lie there feeling your own heartbeat and rehearsing the day, then you are very likely one of the slow ones. 6 hours after that cup, half of the caffeine, or near enough to it, is still circling. And remember the wrinkle we uncovered, the one about paraxanthine. More than 8 in every 10 molecules of the caffeine you swallow get taken apart by that same liver worker and rebuilt into paraxanthine. And paraxanthine is not a bystander. It clamps onto the very same adenosine receptors with a grip about as strong as caffeine's own, and it carries a half-life of its own, 3 to 5 hours, ticking along after the parent molecule has faded. So the true clock of your coffee is not one clock. It is caffeine's clock and paraxanthine's clock running together, overlapping, the second one handing off from the first, and the whole effect stretched out longer than the caffeine number alone would ever tell you. Now take the other kind of person. If you can drink a cup at 8 in the evening and fall asleep at 10 like a stone dropped in a pond, then you are one of the quick ones, and the whole arithmetic of your day is different. Your afternoon cup clears out before it can trouble your night. Your morning cup is gone by lunch. You will need a second one where the slow person needs none, and this is not weakness or strength. It is one worker in one liver doing its job at the speed it was built to do it. Pregnancy slows that worker way down, so that the half-life can stretch toward 15 hours in the last months. Smoking speeds it up, cutting the half-life roughly in half. The point that I keep circling, gently, is that the honest number for you is a number you have to find, not a number you can be handed. So that is the first instruction of the true morning, and notice it is not really an instruction at all. It is an invitation to pay attention. Watch when your sleep frays. Watch when the second cup stops helping. You are the experiment and the experimenter both, and the beautiful thing is you already have years of results sitting unexamined in your memory. The second true part of the morning is the sleep pressure itself, the process S we walked through earlier, the sand piling in the hourglass. Adenosine has been gathering in your waking brain from the moment your eyes opened, and it will keep gathering grain by grain all day long, no matter what is in your mug. That is what caffeine does and does not do. Caffeine does not empty the hourglass. It cannot reach in and remove a single grain of sand. All it does is stand in front of the little doors where adenosine would knock and hold those doors shut for a while so that the brain does not feel how much sand has fallen. The sand is still falling, and when the caffeine finally clears, when caffeine's clock and paroxantine's clock have both run down, all those doors open at once, and the brain feels, in a rush, everything it was not feeling before. That, and not some missed 90-minute window at dawn, is a fair picture of a crash. It is the bill coming due for a debt that was quietly growing the whole time, and laid over that rising sand is the other process. The circadian one presses C, the ticking that does not care whether you slept or not. It runs on its own roughly a day rhythm, and it has a natural dip in the early afternoon, a shallow valley it walks through around the same time each day, whether you drank coffee or climbed a mountain. So the afternoon slump is two things meeting at once. It is the sand grown deep by early afternoon, and it is the circadian tick sliding into its scheduled low. The two of them together in the same window. Move your morning coffee earlier or later by an hour, and you have not touched either one of them. You have only changed how much borrowed alertness you happen to have on hand when the valley arrives. Do you see how much kinder this picture is than the rule? The rule made you responsible for a mistake you supposedly made before you were even fully awake, some crime of sipping too soon. The true picture says the afternoon dip was written into you by two ancient rhythms, and the most you can do with caffeine is decide when to spend a little alertness against it. You are not repairing a broken morning. You are budgeting a real one. So what do you actually do? Here is a way to think about it that is honest all the way down. Treat the caffeine not as a fuel you pour in at the start, but as a card you can play once, maybe twice, across the day, and ask yourself where in the day you most need the door held shut. For a great many people, the honest answer is the early afternoon, right at the mouth of that circadian valley when the sand is already deep. A cup taken a little before the valley, rather than at the very bottom of it, meets the dip as it forms, instead of chasing it after it has already pulled you under. That is not a magic window. It is just arithmetic. You are timing your one card against the two rhythms you cannot move. And here is where that strange clue from the 40,000 lives comes creeping back in, and I want to be careful with it because it is a clue and not a commandment. In that great long watching of 40,725 people over nearly 10 years, the ones whose coffee stayed in the morning fared better than the ones whose coffee ran all day long. The morning drinkers carried a lower chance of dying in the window of the study and a markedly lower chance of dying from the heart in particular, while the all-day drinkers showed no clear benefit at all. Now I told you before, and I will tell you again because it is easy to forget when a number is this tidy, this does not prove that the morning is a magic hour. It could be that people who drink coffee only in the morning are simply people who sleep well, and that it is the good sleep doing the quiet work, and the coffee timing is only its shadow. We do not know. But the clue points in a direction that fits everything else we have built tonight. It says gently that coffee spread thin across the whole day, coffee still in your blood at bedtime, coffee holding those little doors shut when your body is trying to let the sand settle and the whole hourglass empty in sleep, may be the thing that quietly costs you. Because sleep is the only thing that empties the hourglass. That is the part the 90-minute rule never mentioned, and it is the part that matters most. All night long while you lie there, the brain clears out the adenosine, sweeps up the sand, resets the pressure to near zero so that morning can feel like morning. Caffeine that lingers into the night does not just cost you the hours of sleep you lose lying awake. It fights the very machine whose whole job is to give you a clean start tomorrow. So the truest instruction of the true morning is not really about the first sip at all. It is about the last one. Not when you begin, but when you stop. And that turns the whole rule inside out, doesn't it? We spent the night worried about the dawn, about that anxious first cup, and whether we had ruined the day by drinking it too early. And the honest answer, built up piece by piece from cortisol that peaks whenever it pleases, and adenosine that answers waking in minutes, and a liver worker whose speed is yours alone, and two old rhythms grinding through the afternoon, the honest answer is that the dawn was never the danger. The dawn was fine. Drink your coffee when you wake if you like your coffee when you wake. The thing to watch, the real hinge of your afternoon and of the night that follows it, was hiding at the other end of the day the whole time, in the cup you almost poured after dinner and, if you are wise about your own slow or quick machinery, perhaps set back down. So let us sit with that reversal for a while, because it is a gentle one, and it rewards a slow turning over in the mind the way a smooth stone rewards the thumb. We had a rule that pointed at the sunrise. We built it up like a good little machine, cortisol here, adenosine there, receptors clicking shut, and it hummed along beautifully until we looked underneath and found the floor was not attached to anything. And when the floor gives way, most people expect to fall into nothing. But that is not what happened here. We fell, and we landed somewhere firmer than where we started, on the other side of the day entirely, at the last cup instead of the first. That is the quiet pleasure of taking a wrong idea apart honestly. You do not end up with an empty hand. You end up with a truer thing, and it is usually smaller, and it is usually stranger, and it is nearly always more useful. Now I want to be fair to the person, whoever you are, lying there in the dark listening, who feels a little cheated. You came for a number. You wanted me to say, wait this many minutes and your afternoon is saved. And instead I keep handing you ranges and genes you cannot see and a half-life that might be an hour and a half or might be most of the working day. And I keep saying it depends on you. It depends on you, as though that were an answer and not a shrug. I understand the frustration. A range feels like the scientist ran out of time before he found the real number. But I want to persuade you, softly, that the range is the real number. The spread from about 90 minutes to about 9.5 hours is not our ignorance. It is a fact about human beings. It is as solid and as measured a fact as the boiling point of water. It says people are genuinely, physically different in how long a cup of coffee lives inside them. And the difference is not small. It is a factor of 6 or more, and pretending otherwise to get a tidy rule would be the actual mistake. Think of it like this. Suppose I told you the height of a person is 5 feet 9 inches. You would say, whose height? And I would say, people's height, the height of a person. And you would laugh, because of course there is no such thing. There is a distribution. There are short people and tall people and everyone between, and the average is a real quantity, but it does not describe anyone in particular. And if you built a doorway for the average person, a good number of people would crack their heads. Caffeine is like that, only we cannot see it the way we see height. Two friends can order the same drink at the same little table at 3 in the afternoon, and for one of them it is gone by supper, and for the other it is still circling the bloodstream at midnight, dimming the sleep, thinning it out, and neither of them can tell by looking which one they are. That invisibility is the whole trouble. If slow metabolizers walked around a foot taller than fast ones, nobody would ever have believed a single rule for everybody. We would have looked around the room and seen instantly that people are not the same. And here is a thing that ought to unsettle you a little, in a comfortable way, the way a good ghost story unsettles you when you are safe under the blankets. The person who most needs to be careful about the afternoon cup is precisely the person least likely to feel that they need to be careful. The slow metabolizer, the one whose liver ambles through the work over 8 or 9 hours, does not experience their coffee as strong. They feel it as mild, as pleasant, as barely there, because the level in their blood never spikes into a jolt. It just rises gently and stays and stays and stays. So they think, this stuff does nothing to me, I can drink it whenever, and they pour the evening cup with a clear conscience, and it is that very cup, in that very person, that lingers longest into the night. The one who feels the least is the one it follows the furthest. And the fast metabolizer who gets the sharp, lovely kick and then nothing, who says, oh, I am very sensitive to caffeine, is often the one who could get away with a cup after dinner and never notice. The feeling and the fact run backwards from each other. That is the sort of joke nature likes to play, and it plays it with a straight face. I said a moment ago that adenosine gets cleared during sleep, that the sand runs back out of the hourglass while you are lying there insensible. Let me press on that, because it is where the last cup and the first cup finally shake hands. All day the pressure builds. Every hour awake, the little molecule accumulates in the wake, keeping quarters of the brain, and it leans on you, and by evening it is leaning hard, which is exactly as it should be, because that lean is what lets you fall asleep at all. Sleep is not something you do to a rested brain. It is something a tired brain does to itself, and the tiredness, the chemical tiredness, is the invitation. Now into that carefully accumulated pressure, that evening cup of coffee walks in and sits down on the receptors and says, I will take the messages. The person is not in. The adenosine is still there. The pressure is still there. But the doorman has been bribed, and the message does not get through, and you lie in bed feeling wide and strange, tired underneath and buzzing on top, which is the most miserable combination there is. And even if you do fall asleep, even if the pressure is so high it shoulders past the caffeine and drags you under, the caffeine and its long-lived cousin do not leave just because you have. They keep at the receptors through the night. And here is the mischief. That precious clearing of adenosine, that resetting of the hourglass that is supposed to happen while you sleep, is the very thing sleep is for, and it is exactly what caffeine interferes with. So you can wake in the morning with the sand not fully run out, with yesterday's pressure not fully discharged, and what do you reach for to fix that groggy, underslept feeling? You reach for the coffee. And now you begin to see the shape of the trap, the little circle a person can walk around and around without ever noticing they are walking in a circle. The evening cup steals from the night's cleaning. The unclean night leaves you tired. The tiredness demands the morning cup and pushes the whole habit later and heavier until there is an evening cup again holding the door for tomorrow's tiredness. Round and round, and the 90-minute rule, bless it, was standing at the top of that circle fussing about whether you started your loop at 7 or at 8:30, when the loop itself was the thing worth noticing. I do not want to frighten anybody off their coffee. Heaven forbid. I like the stuff, and there is a great deal in its favor, and we are coming to some numbers soon that put a surprising amount of weight on its side, so do not lie there resolving to give it up. That is not the lesson. The lesson is only that the interesting knob, the one that actually does something, is not the one everybody has been reaching for. Everybody has their hand on the morning knob, turning it this way and that, waiting 90 minutes, waiting 2 hours, timing the cortisol, and the morning knob, we have found, is barely connected to anything. Meanwhile, the evening knob, the one nobody is watching, is wired straight to the quality of your night and through your night to the whole tired or rested feeling of the next day. Same substance, same receptors, same person. All the leverage sitting at the far end of the day from where everyone is pushing. There is something almost funny about how consistently we do this, as a species, with our own bodies. We love the beginning of things. We fuss about how to start. What is the best exercise to begin the day? The best food to break the fast? The first thing to do when the alarm rings? The perfect opening move? And we are careless about how things end, about the last mile and the last bite and the last cup, as though the ending were just the part where you stop paying attention. But a body is a system that runs on cycles, and in a cycle the ending of one turn is the beginning of the next. There is no privileged starting line. The evening feeds, the night feeds, the morning feeds, the day feeds the evening, and if you want to change the wheel, you can push anywhere on it, and it turns out the place where a small push moves the most is not the dawn we have all been staring at. It is the dusk we have been ignoring. So keep that stone in your hand as we go on, because I have been telling you all night what does not work, and I have hinted that something surprising is waiting. Some actual measured thing that finally puts a number on all this hand-waving. And it does not come from a laboratory with people wired to machines. It comes from something bigger and stranger. From following 40,000 ordinary lives across many years and simply watching and asking the plainest question you can ask about coffee, which is not when should I drink it to feel clever in the afternoon, but the older, heavier question underneath. The one about who is still here at the end of all those years and who is not, and whether the humble matter of morning or all day long left any fingerprint at all on the answer. Now let me put that number in front of you plainly, because it is a real number and it deserves respect. Somebody went and gathered the records of 40,725 grown men and women in the United States, ordinary people, and followed them across many years, with the middle of that following stretching out to nearly 10 years, about 9.8 years for the typical person in the pile. And these were not laboratory volunteers wired to machines and told what to sip and when. These were people living their lives, drinking their coffee the way they always drank it, some in the morning only, some all the livelong day, from breakfast to supper, and the record simply asked, quietly, over all those years, who is still here and who is gone. 4,295 of them died during the watching. Of those, 1,268 died from the heart and the blood vessels, and 934 from cancer. That is not a small study you can wave away. That is a great crowd of real lives, and the arithmetic underneath it has some heft. And here is the thing that ought to make you sit up under your blanket, gently, without spilling anything. When they sorted these people into the ones who drank their coffee only in the morning and the ones who drank it all day long, the two groups did not come out the same. The morning-only drinkers had about 16% lower risk of dying from any cause at all during those years, compared with the people who drank no coffee whatsoever. Put in the language of the statisticians, their hazard was 0.84, which is just a fancy way of saying their chance of dying in any given stretch was about 84 out of 100 relative to the coffee abstainers. And when you looked only at deaths from the heart and the vessels, the morning drinkers did even better, about 31% lower, a hazard of 0.69, roughly 7/10 the risk. That is a big sounding number for something as humble as when you happen to hold your mug. Now hold on, because the other half of the comparison is where it gets interesting, and I want you to feel the shape of it. The all-day drinkers, the ones sipping from sunrise to sundown, they did not show any of that clear benefit. Their all-cause hazard came in around 0.96, which is so close to 1, so close to no difference at all, that you cannot really lean on it. Their cardiovascular hazard was 0.82, better than nothing perhaps, but nothing you could call a firm and confident finding. So the same drink, the very same molecule we have been talking about all night, the same caffeine locking onto the same receptors, seems to travel with a different fate depending only on the clock face when it is drunk. Morning, and there is a fingerprint, all day, and the fingerprint smudges into nothing you can read. Now I have to be very careful here, and I want you to be careful with me, because this is exactly the sort of place where a person can fool themselves, and the easiest person for you to fool is always yourself. This is what we call an observational study. Nobody assigned these people to drink in the morning or all day. They chose it, or their lives chose it for them. And the moment people sort themselves, you have to wonder what else is riding along with the sorting. Maybe the person who only drinks coffee in the morning is also the person who sleeps better and stops the caffeine early precisely because they guard their sleep. Maybe the all-day drinker is tired for some other reason, some illness stirring quietly, and reaches for the cup again at 4 in the afternoon because the body is already struggling. The coffee might be a flag flying over the trouble, not the trouble itself, and not the cure. A correlation like this points a finger. It does not close the case. I would be lying to you, and I promised at the start of this long night that I would not lie to you if I dressed this up as proof that morning coffee makes you live longer. It does not say that. It says something quieter and, to my taste, more interesting. It says the pattern of when, across the whole arc of a day, seems to carry more information about the outcome than the pattern of how much. And do you feel the lovely irony sitting in that? We spent hours tonight taking apart a rule that was all about timing, the 90-minute rule, the wait for your cortisol rule, and I showed you that its particular little timing story, the morning window business, does not hold together. But timing itself, the bigger, humbler question of morning versus all day, that did not vanish. It came back wearing different clothes, at a completely different scale, measured not in minutes after waking, but in the broad difference between a body that gets a caffeine-free evening and a body that never quite does. The small, clever timing collapsed. A large, stubborn timing survived. Nature has a sense of humor about these things if you are willing to notice it. Let me suggest to you why the big timing might matter, and I want to be honest that now I am telling you a story. A plausible story, not a proven one, so hold it loosely. Think back to that caffeine half-life. The 5 hours on average, stretching from an hour and a half in some people to nearly 10 hours in others. Think about the paraxanthine that caffeine turns into, more than 8 parts in 10 of it, carrying its own 3 to 5 hour half-life and its own grip on the very same receptors. Now picture the all-day drinker taking a cup at 4 in the afternoon. For a slow metabolizer, someone on the long end of that range, a good fraction of that caffeine and the paraxanthine trailing behind it is still circulating at midnight, still quietly sitting on the A2A receptors, still whispering to the brain that it is not time to rest. That is the two-process model coming back to bite. Process S, the sleep pressure, the adenosine piling up like drifting sand across all the waking hours, is trying to do its honest job of making you sleepy so you will sleep and clear it away. And caffeine is the doorman standing in front of the receptors saying, no messages get through tonight. The sand keeps piling, but the signal that would tell you about it is muffled. So the evening cup does not just make one bad night. Do it often enough and you shave a little off your sleep, night after night after night, and the adenosine never gets its full clearing, and the whole delicate arrangement between process S and process C, between the piling sand and the turning circadian clock, drifts a little out of true. And poor sleep, sustained across years, is not a trivial thing for the heart, or the blood pressure, or the slow inflammatory weather of the body. The morning-only drinker, by contrast, gets the lift when it is useful and hands the evening back to the machinery that is trying to repair and reset. That is a mechanism you can at least tell a straight face about. Whether it is the true reason those 40,000 lives sorted out the way they did, I cannot swear to you. But it rhymes, doesn't it, with everything the real biochemistry has been telling us all night. And notice what we have quietly done here. We threw away the folk rule, the tidy 90-minute number, and I promised you we would build something better in its place. And what we built is not another single magic number. It is a system. It is the cortisol awakening response doing its 50% climb in the first half hour, indifferent to your mug. It is the adenosine responding to waking in minutes, not the hour and a half the rule demanded. It is the tolerance in the habitual drinker blunting or abolishing the cortisol bump the whole rule was built to protect. It is the half-life spread across a factor of 6 from person to person, written into one liver gene. It is the paraxanthine extending the reach of every cup past the caffeine itself. And now it is the shape of the whole day, morning against all day, showing up in the mortality records of a great crowd of strangers. All of those things are true at once, all of them are pulling on the same rope, and no one of them is the answer. Because in a living body there is almost never one answer wearing a crown while the others bow. That is the real trouble with a clean rule, and it is worth sitting with as the night gets late. A clean rule feels like knowledge. It fits in your pocket. You can tell it to a friend at breakfast and feel wise. Wait 90 minutes. Done, solved, filed away. But the body did not agree to be simple just because simplicity is comfortable for us. The body is a committee, a weather system, a set of feedback loops arguing with each other in a language of hormones and receptors and enzymes, and it was tuned not by anyone's convenience, but by a long, blind, patient process that only ever cared whether the whole arrangement worked well enough to carry on. When you demand a single number from a thing like that, it will often hand you one, politely, and the number will be wrong in the specific, and it will fool you in exactly the way we have watched it fool people all night long. The honest picture is messier, and it is also, if you let it be, far more beautiful, because it is actually true. So I want to leave the clean rule behind us now, for good, lying in the ditch where it belongs, and turn toward the messy true thing that is left standing, the thing that is different for you than it is for the person sleeping in the next room, the thing written in your own liver, in your own gene, in the particular speed at which your own body takes a molecule apart, because that, in the end, is where the last piece of this waits. So here is the molecule sitting in your cup, and here is you about to take it in. The first thing to notice, and it is a lovely thing, is that your body does not put up much of a fight at the door. When you swallow caffeine, very nearly all of it gets through. Almost 100% of what you drink finds its way into your blood. There is no customs house, no long line, no tax collected at the gut. That is unusual. Many things you eat get chewed up and thrown away before they ever do anything. Caffeine walks straight in as if it belonged there, and in a sense it does, because it happens to be shaped just enough like adenosine to fool the locks that adenosine was meant to open. So within a short while of that first sip, the stuff is everywhere in you, circulating, knocking politely on receptor after receptor, and settling into every one it can fit. Now the question that actually matters, the one the 90-minute story never bothered to ask, is not when the caffeine arrives. It is how long it stays. And to answer that we need a single idea, an old one, a very simple one, and I want to give it to you slowly because everything else hangs on it. Imagine you have a certain amount of something in you, and your body is quietly hauling it away at a steady clip. We measure that hauling not by how long until the last molecule is gone, because that turns out to be a slippery and almost meaningless number, but by how long until half of it is gone. Half. That is the trick. You wait a certain stretch of time, and half has been carried off. You wait that same stretch again, and half of what remained goes too, so now you are down to a quarter. Again, and you are at an eighth. This is what we call the half-life, and it is one of the most useful ideas in all of physics and chemistry, because so many things in nature empty out in exactly this patient halving way. For caffeine, in a sort of average grown-up, that halving time is about 5 hours. Sit with that a moment, because it is longer than people think. You have your coffee, and 5 hours later, half of the caffeine is still in you, still doing its work, still sitting on those receptors where adenosine wants to be. 5 hours after that, so 10 hours from the sip, a quarter of it is still there. If you took a good strong cup at, say, the middle of the afternoon, then late in the evening, when you are trying to persuade yourself towards sleep, a real fraction of that molecule is still on the job, still whispering to your brain that it is not time yet. That is the 5 hours. That is the average. But here is where the whole tidy picture, the one that wanted to give everybody the same number, comes completely apart in your hands, and it comes apart in the most wonderful way. Because that 5 hours is only the average. For any particular person, the halving time of caffeine can be as short as about an hour and a half, or as long as roughly 9.5 hours. Think about the size of that spread. One person clears half their caffeine in 90 minutes. Another person, drinking the very same cup, takes more than 6 times as long to do the same job. 9.5 hours to lose half. For that second person, a cup at lunch is very nearly a cup at bedtime, still half full of its effect when the moon is up. And for the first person, the whole thing has mostly washed through before the afternoon is old. Now what on earth makes two people so different? It is mostly one thing, and I find this delicious, because it takes us right down into the machinery. Down in your liver there is a particular little worker, an enzyme, a molecular tool whose whole job is to grab the caffeine molecule and start taking it apart. We have given it an unlovely name, a jumble of letters and a number, and I will not make the reading machine stumble over it. Call it the caffeine cutter, and the instructions for building your particular caffeine cutter are written in your genes, and those instructions differ from person to person. Some people are built with a fast cutter. It seizes the caffeine and dismantles it briskly, and those are your 90-minute people, the ones who can drink a strong cup after dinner and sleep like a stone. Other people carry the slow version. Their cutter works at a leisurely pace, in no hurry at all, and the caffeine lingers and lingers. Same coffee, same amount, wildly different afternoon and wildly different night, and the difference is not willpower and it is not timing. It is a word spelled in your chromosomes that you did nothing to earn and cannot change. And the plot thickens, because that gene is not the only thing turning the dial. If a woman is carrying a child deep into the pregnancy, her caffeine half-life stretches out enormously, up toward 15 hours. 15. The very same cup that would pass through her in 5 hours before now sits in her for 3 times as long, because the body has throttled the caffeine cutter down. And going the other way, in people who smoke, the cutter runs faster and the half-life drops by roughly half. So a smoker burns through caffeine about twice as quickly as they otherwise would, which means, curiously, that when a heavy coffee and cigarette person quits the cigarettes, their caffeine suddenly starts lasting much longer in them, and the same number of cups that once felt fine can start to feel like too much, like a jittery overdose, and they never connect the two. The coffee did not change. The cutter did. So already the notion that there is one right minute of the morning to lift your mug looks a little absurd, does it not? when the very clock that governs how long the drink acts runs at such different speeds in different bodies. But I have been keeping something back, and it is the part that truly undoes any hope of a simple story, so let me hand it to you now, gently, because it is worth savoring. When your liver's cutter takes the caffeine apart, it does not simply reduce it to harmless rubble and sweep it away. It breaks the caffeine into a few new molecules, 3 of them mainly, cousins of the original, and here is the thing. More than 4/5 of the caffeine, the great bulk of it, gets turned into one particular cousin. And that cousin is not asleep. That cousin binds to the very same adenosine receptors with very nearly the same strength as caffeine itself. It is, for your brain's purposes, almost another dose of caffeine, made inside you out of the caffeine you drank. Do you see what this means? You take one molecule that keeps you awake, and your body, in the act of trying to be rid of it, manufactures another molecule that keeps you awake. And this cousin has its own halving time, its own 3 to 5 hours of lingering. So the true duration of what you would loosely call the caffeine effect is not just the caffeine's own 5 hours. It is the caffeine plus the long tail of this offspring it leaves behind, still occupying the receptors, still holding the door shut against adenosine, hours after the caffeine that started it all has largely gone. The effect outlives its own cause. The parent fades and the child carries on. It is a little like a fire that as it dies down keeps throwing sparks that start small new fires of their own, so the warmth in the room outlasts the log by a good while. And now stack all of this together in your mind, because this is the real picture, the messy true thing I promised was left standing. You have a drink that gets in almost completely, that acts for 5 hours on average, but anywhere from an hour and a half to 9.5 in a given person, that is dismantled by a liver tool whose speed is set by your genes and bent by whether you are carrying a child or holding a cigarette, and that turns, as it is dismantled, into a nearly as potent offspring that keeps the whole effect going long past the point where you would have guessed it was over. Not one number in that whole account is the same for you as for the person sleeping in the next room. Not the arrival, not the half-life, not the cutter speed, not the size of the lingering tail. Every dial is set differently in every body. This is why, when someone asks me the simple, hopeful question, when should I have my coffee to feel best and to crash least? The honest answer is not a time on a clock. The honest answer starts with a question back. How fast is your particular cutter? Because until you know that, you do not even know how long your last cup is still working on you, and if you do not know that, you cannot possibly know whether the tiredness sinking over you at 3 in the afternoon is your own sleep pressure rising on its own schedule, or the last of the morning's caffeine finally releasing its grip and letting all that dammed up adenosine flood in at once. The crash you blame on bad timing might be nothing more than the tide of your own chemistry coming back in, at the hour it was always going to come, in a body whose clearance rate was decided long before you ever poured a cup. And that difference between the tide and the timing is the thing we have to sort out next, because it changes everything about what a crash even is. Let me sit with that word tide for a while, because it does more honest work than any rule ever could. When you stand at the edge of the ocean and the water pulls back from your feet, you do not blame the last wave for leaving. You understand that something enormous and slow, something tied to the moon and the turning of the whole world, is breathing in and out on its own schedule, and the little wave was only the surface of it. Your afternoon is like that. There is a great slow breathing underneath, the piling up of adenosine hour by hour that we call process S, and the steady turning of your inner clock that we call process C, and these two things were going to meet in the early afternoon and press down on you whether or not you ever touched a coffee cup. That is the tide. And then there is the little wave on top, the caffeine and its long-lived cousins still clinging to your receptors, holding the door shut against the adenosine until the moment your liver finishes its quiet work and lets go. When that grip releases, the pressure that was always building rushes in all at once, and you feel it as a drop. But the drop was not made by the caffeine leaving. The pressure was made by the ordinary passing of your day. The caffeine only decided the hour at which you noticed. So when somebody hands you a single number and says, wait this long and you will not crash, they are telling you they can predict the tide by watching one wave. And I hope by now you feel in your bones why that cannot work. To know your afternoon, I would need to know how fast your particular liver clears the drug, and that depends on a gene you were handed at conception. I would need to know whether you are a person who drinks coffee every single morning, because if you are, the whole hormone story the rule was built on has already been quieted almost to silence inside you. I would need to know when you actually woke, and how long you have truly been awake, and how much sleep pressure you carried into the day from the night before. I would need to know whether you smoke, which speeds the clearance, or whether you are carrying a child, which slows it down enormously. That is not one number. That is a small tangle of numbers, all pulling on each other, and every one of them is different in you than it is in the person sitting beside you. Now I want to be fair to the human mind here, because the appeal of the clean rule is not stupidity. It is something much deeper and much more forgivable. We are pattern-finding animals, and a single crisp instruction feels like understanding in a way that a tangle never does. Wait 90 minutes. You can hold that in your hand. You can tell it to a friend across a table. It has the shape of a law, and we have grown up being told correctly that nature does have laws, beautiful ones, simple ones. When a rock falls, it really does obey something you can write in a single short line. So it is natural, it is almost admirable, to hope that your morning cup obeys a line just as short. The trouble is that falling rocks and living bodies are not the same kind of thing. A rock has no history. A rock does not remember what it drank yesterday. A rock does not have a liver that runs faster or slower depending on a molecule of protein coded by a stretch of your own particular chromosome. When you drop a rock, every rock falls the same. When you drink coffee, no two people fall the same at all. And here is what I find genuinely lovely about this, the thing that turns the disappointment into wonder. The reason there is no universal number is the same reason you are a distinct person and not a copy. The variation is not noise getting in the way of the truth. The variation is the truth. Think of that spread we talked about. The elimination time that can be as short as an hour and a half in one person and as long as 9.5 hours in another. That is a six-fold difference roughly in how long the very same cup keeps working, and it comes down largely to how busily one enzyme in your liver does its job. Two friends can pour identical cups from the same pot at the same minute of the same morning, and for one of them the caffeine is nearly gone by lunch, while for the other it is still more than half present at supper, still quietly holding the door against sleep. If you gave both of them the same rule, the same clock time to sip, and the same promise about the afternoon, you would be right for neither, and you would not even be wrong in the same direction for both. You would simply be describing an average person who does not exist. I think that is where these tidy rules always go to die, in the gap between the average and the actual. You can measure 1,000 people and find that, on the whole, caffeine hangs around for about 5 hours. That number is real, it is useful, it is the center of the crowd. But no single person is obliged to be the center of the crowd, and most are not. It is like saying the average family has some fraction of a child. True in the ledger, absurd in any living room. The rule about waiting made the same mistake in a subtle address. It took a story that was, at best, about an average nervous system in an average schedule, and it handed that story to you as though it were a fact about your specific Tuesday. And your Tuesday does not care about the average. Your Tuesday is run by your genes, your habit, your sleep, your smoke, your pregnancy or its absence, all conspiring together into a clearance rate that is yours alone. Let me push on this idea of a system a little more, because I do not want you to walk away thinking, well, it is all just complicated, throw up your hands. That is the wrong lesson entirely. Complicated is not the same as unknowable. It only means the knowledge has a different shape. A single rule is a knowledge shaped like a point, one value, take it or leave it. But the real knowledge here is shaped like a set of dials. There is a dial for your genetics, mostly set for life and mostly out of your hands. There is a dial for your daily habit, which you turn a little every morning you drink, and which slowly dulls the very hormonal response the old rule was built to protect. There is a dial for how much sleep you got, which sets how high the tide starts before the day even begins. And there is a dial for the clock, the deep circadian turning that you can nudge but cannot argue with. Your afternoon is whatever those dials add up to on that day. Change one, and the sum changes. That is not chaos. That is a machine, a real one with real inputs, and once you see it as a machine, you stop looking for the magic minute and you start asking, which of my dials can I actually reach? And when you ask it that way, the honest answers turn out to be almost boringly ordinary, which is exactly how you know they are true. The dial you can reach most easily is not the minute of your first sip. It is the total load, and above all, how late in the day you keep reaching for the cup. Remember why. That long tail we kept circling back to, the way the active effect outlasts the caffeine itself, because so much of it becomes another wakeful molecule with its own patient half-life of several hours. A cup in the morning has all day to fade toward nothing before you lie down. A cup in the late afternoon is still standing guard at your receptors when your body is trying to raise the tide of sleep for the night. It is not the 90 minutes after you wake that quietly shapes your day and your night. It is the hours before you sleep. The rule pointed at the wrong end of the clock entirely. It fussed over the sunrise when the thing that actually mattered was the sunset. There is a kind of poetry in that inversion, and I keep turning it over. We were told to guard the beginning of the day, to hold back, to delay, to protect a cortisol peak that in truth needs no protecting and in a regular drinker has mostly gone quiet anyway. And all the while the lever that genuinely moves your afternoon and your night was sitting at the other end in the choice to have or not have that late cup, the one whose long chemical shadow reaches forward into the dark. Nobody made a viral rule out of that, and I think I know why. Do not drink coffee late is old and dull, and your grandmother probably said it. It has no number in it, no neuroscience, no clever window of 90 minutes to make you feel let in on a secret. It has only the quiet ring of something true, and true things are often the least exciting things in the room. So we are left holding something better than a rule, though it asks more of us. We are left holding a picture of a body as a slow machine of overlapping tides, each running on its own clock, none of them synchronized to a stranger's advice. And the interesting question stops being what time should everyone sip, which has no answer, and becomes what is the shape of the tide in you, which does. That is a question you can actually begin to answer, not by reading a number off a screen, but by paying attention over days to your own particular afternoons and your own particular nights. So let us sit with that question a while, because it is a better companion than any rule. What is the shape of the tide in you? I want to give you some honest tools for feeling it out, not measuring it with instruments, just noticing, the way a person who lives by the sea learns the water without ever reading a chart. Think about the last time you slept badly. One short night, maybe 4 or 5 hours, and then a full day pressed on top of it. You know what the afternoon felt like. Around 2, around 3, a heaviness came down over your eyes like a warm hand, and no rule about morning sips would have saved you. Because the thing dragging you down was not a mistimed cup. It was pressure. The sand in the hourglass had barely emptied overnight, so it began the new day already half full, and by mid-afternoon it had crept up near the top again. That is the homeostatic drive I was describing, the slow one, the one that only truly resets when you sleep. Caffeine can sit on the receptors and hide the signal for a few hours, but it does not carry the sand out of the glass. It only tapes a piece of paper over the gauge, and when the caffeine fades, when that 5-hour half-life has done its quiet subtraction once and then again, the paper comes off the gauge, and suddenly you can read the true level, and the true level is high. That, more than any hormone in your first waking half hour, is what an afternoon crash actually is. It is the bill for the sleep you did not fully take, arriving with interest. Now here is something I find genuinely lovely about this, and I mean lovely in the way a good machine is lovely when you finally see how it fits together. The two processes I told you about, the piling sand and the ticking clock, they do not merely add up. They are arranged to fight each other on purpose, and the fight is what keeps you upright. Across the day the sand piles higher and higher, so your pressure to sleep grows all afternoon and all evening. If that were the only thing at work, you would get steadily, monotonously sleepier from breakfast to bedtime, sagging a little more each hour. But you do not, quite. You often feel a second wind in the early evening, a little lift right when, by the sand alone, you ought to feel worst. Where does that lift come from? It comes from the clock. The circadian process, the 24-hour rhythm, sends out a rising wake-up signal in the evening, a kind of alerting push, and it climbs at just the right time to cancel the growing weight of the sand. The clock pushes up while the sand pushes down, and the two nearly balance, so you stay awake and coherent across a very long day instead of nodding off at dinner. It is a tug-of-war engineered so that neither side wins until night, when the clock finally releases its pull and the sand comes crashing down all at once, and you sleep. When you understand that, the afternoon dip stops being a mystery. It is simply a moment when the sand has grown heavy, but the clock's evening rescue has not yet arrived. A gap. A low place between two hills, and no first sip of the morning, at any hour a stranger recommends, changes the terrain of those hills. So if you feel that dip, and nearly everyone does, you are not doing coffee wrong. You are feeling the honest architecture of being an animal that has been awake for 7 or 8 hours and has not yet reached the evening lift. That is worth knowing, because it takes the guilt out of it. You were sold a rule that quietly implied the crash was your fault, a punishment for sipping too soon. It is not a punishment. It is a tide. And here is where I want to be careful, because I have spent a long time tearing one story down, and a good scientist does not enjoy demolition for its own sake. The demolition is only worth it if it leaves you standing on firmer ground. So let me be plain about what I am not saying. I am not saying caffeine timing never matters. It matters enormously, but at the other end of the day, not the beginning. Remember that half-life, that 5 hours on average, stretching out to 9.5 hours in some people because of a single busy little liver enzyme. Picture a person on the slow end of that range who drinks a strong cup at 4 in the afternoon. 5 hours later, at 9 at night, half of that caffeine is still circulating. Another 5 hours past 2 in the morning, and a quarter of it is still there. Still sitting on the adenosine receptors, still holding the paper over the gauge. And I have not even counted paraxanthine, the offspring compound, more than 8 parts in 10 of the caffeine turning into it, binding the same receptors nearly as well, carrying its own 3 to 5 hour half-life like a second shift clocking in as the first goes home. So the afternoon cup does not just fail to fix the crash. In a slow metabolizer, it quietly poisons the coming night's sleep, which thins the sleep, which leaves more sand in the glass the next morning, which deepens tomorrow's crash. Round and round. The one true lever you have over the afternoon dip is not what time you start caffeine. It is what time you stop. Notice how much messier and more useful that is than 90 minutes. It does not give everyone the same number. It says, find your own cutoff and find it by paying attention. If you are the sort of person for whom an evening cup ruins your sleep, you are probably a slow metabolizer, and your afternoon deadline for caffeine sits early, maybe by noon, maybe by 2. If you can drink a coffee after dinner and drop off like a stone, you are likely a fast one, blessed with a brisk enzyme, and your night can absorb a later cup. The rule cannot know which you are. Only your own particular nights can tell you. And that, I think, is the honest transaction the body offers. It will not hand you a universal number. It will hand you a way of listening. Let me linger on that word listening, because it is doing real work here. When I was young, I wanted every answer to come as a clean formula. One line you could write on a board and be done. Physics rewards that hunger up to a point. But living systems, bodies, they are a different kind of object. They are not wrong for refusing to give you a single number. They are just a different sort of true. A river does not have a temperature. It has temperatures, colder in the deep shade, warmer over the shallow stones, and the honest thing is not to demand the one number, but to learn where the cold parts are. Your caffeine metabolism is like that. Your sleep pressure is like that. There is a range, and you live somewhere in it, and the finding out is not a failure of science. It is the whole of it. There is one more thread I have left dangling, and I do not want you drifting off before I pick it up again, because it is the strangest turn in this whole story. All through this I have been talking as though the only thing at stake is whether you feel bright or dim in the afternoon. A small matter, in the scheme of things. Comfort, alertness, the quality of an ordinary Tuesday. But there was a study, a large one, that looked at something much heavier than an afternoon mood. It looked at who lived and who died across many years, and it sorted people not by how much coffee they drank, but by when. And what it found does not fit the tidy 90-minute rule at all, and it does not quite fit my tidy dismissal of timing either. It sits sideways to both. It suggests that the pattern of your coffee across the whole day, morning only against morning to night, tracks with something as serious as your heart. I have been holding that back, letting it wait, because it deserves its own careful walk. So let me take you into it slowly, the way you would wade into cold water, one step at a time, and let us see what 40,000 people and nearly a decade of watching can actually tell us. And, just as important, what they cannot. Before we go there, breathe with the size of it for a moment. 40,725 people, not a laboratory of a dozen students sipping measured doses under a fluorescent light, but a great crowd of ordinary adults living ordinary lives, eating badly and well, sleeping enough and not enough, drinking their coffee whenever habit or work or a crying child dictated. And the watchers did not interfere. They simply asked what and when, and then waited patiently for years, a median of nearly 10 years, writing down as gently as such things can be written who was still here and who was not. That kind of study cannot prove that coffee caused anything. It can only notice patterns, and the patterns are only as trustworthy as the tangle of everything else that differs between a morning drinker and an all-day drinker. Hold on to that caution. Carry it in with you, because what they noticed is striking enough that it would be easy to forget the caution entirely, and the forgetting is exactly the trap the 90-minute rule sprang on us in the first place. So here is what they noticed. The people who drank their coffee only in the morning and then set the cup down for the rest of the day had about 16% lower odds of dying from any cause over those years than the people who drank no coffee at all. And when the watchers narrowed their gaze to the heart, to the great pump and its rivers, the difference grew. The morning drinkers had something like 31% lower odds of dying from heart trouble. A third, near enough. That is not a small ripple in a pond. That is a wave. And now for the part that makes you sit up in your chair gently so as not to spill anything. The people who drank coffee all day long, morning and noon and dusk, sipping steadily from the first light to the evening, did not show that clear benefit at all. Their numbers drifted back toward the middle, back toward the crowd of people who drank none. Whatever good the morning drinkers were getting, the all-day drinkers were somehow not getting, or were getting and losing again. Out of the whole gathering, 4,295 people had died by the time the watchers closed their notebooks. Of those, 1,268 were the heart. 934 were cancer. Real numbers, real people, real years. Now I want you to feel two things at once and hold them both without letting either one win. The first is wonder, because it looks, doesn't it, as though when you drink your coffee matters more than how much of it you pour. That is a marvelous, tidy little idea. The second is that stubborn caution I asked you to carry in the door with you. Because notice, please, what this study did not do. It did not take 1,000 people and assign half of them to drink only in the morning, like soldiers under orders, and watch what happened. It watched what people already chose to do. And people who stop drinking coffee by noon are different from people who drink it at 9 at night. They may sleep better. They may be steadier in 100 quiet ways we never measured. Maybe the late drinkers are the ones lying awake, wearing down their own hearts a sip at a time, and the coffee is just the fingerprint, not the hand. So we have circled all the way back to where we started, but we are standing on higher ground now, and we can see the shape of the whole valley. We came in believing a beautiful, clean rule. Wait 90 minutes. Let the cortisol crest and fall. Let the sleepy chemical drain away. Then drink and be spared the afternoon collapse. And piece by piece we watch that rule come apart in our hands. The cortisol does its climb and its little peak in the first hour no matter what you do, and the coffee nudges cortisol up wherever you drop it into the day. The sleepy chemical answers your waking in minutes, not in the long hour and a half the rule needed to survive. And for the regular drinker, the one the rule was supposedly written for, the whole cortisol dance is faded to a whisper, or gone entirely. And yet look what we found underneath the wreckage. Not nothing, something better. A real clock, but a private one, set differently in each of us by a single busy gene in the liver, so that the same cup lingers 90 minutes in one person and most of a working day in another, and then hands off its work to a second messenger that keeps the lights on long after the first has left the room. And a real crash, but one that was never about your first sip at all. It was the slow filling of the hourglass across every waking hour, married to the great daily tide of the body that dips in the early afternoon, whether you have had coffee or water or nothing at all. And out past all of that, a hint, only a hint, that the rhythm of your drinking across the day may weave into the rhythm of your whole life in ways we are only beginning to squint at. I want to tell you why the clean rule felt so good, because that feeling is worth understanding all on its own. A single number is a gift. 90 minutes. You can hold it in your hand. You can obey it. It asks nothing of you but a glance at the clock. But your body is not a number. Your body is a committee, and the members are always arguing. A hormone that rises and falls on its own schedule. 4 little docking ports that a drug crowds into. A gene that runs fast in one person and slow in the next. A tolerance that grows quietly with every morning cup until the very effect you were managing has all but vanished. A tide of wakefulness and sleepiness that sweeps through you on a rhythm older than any advice. These do not add up to a rule. They add up to a weather, and you would no more manage your afternoon with one fixed number than you would decide what to wear for the whole year by looking out the window on a single January morning. That, I think, is the real lesson hiding inside a cup of coffee, and it is a lesson that reaches far past coffee. We love a rule because it saves us from paying attention. And nature, again and again, refuses to be that kind. Not out of cruelty, out of richness. The truth is more complicated than the rule, but it is also more interesting. And it is also more yours. Nobody else has quite your gene, your tolerance, your tide. The honest answer to when you should drink your coffee is not a number somebody read off a chart. It is an answer only you can find by living inside your own body and noticing gently over many mornings what it actually does. So tomorrow, when you wake and the light is thin and you reach for that warm cup with both hands the way we all do not think about the 90 minutes. That number was never yours. Think instead that you are holding a small brown puzzle that touches your hormones, your genes, your ancient inner clock, and the slow arithmetic of your own long life, and that no one on earth knows exactly how it will move through you, because no one on earth is built exactly like you. Drink it when it feels right. Notice what happens, and let the mystery of your own afternoon be for once not a problem to solve, but a quiet marvel to fall asleep beside.